Hey Guy, the Black Death, or the Plague, a horrific pandemic that caused the deaths of millions. What would happen if you lived in this terrifying time? Death exists everywhere. The disease makes people become bizarre, the beaked masks. So before getting comfortable, or taking a bit of time to like the video, subscribe. But only if you really like what I do here. And please tell me in the comments where you are following the channel from, and what time it is. It will be very interesting to see everyone joining us all over the world. Now lower the brightness of the lights. Enjoy the quiet space. Listen to the story along with a bit of the sound of firewood. Let's together step into tonight's journey. You wake up, not in a warm modern room, but in a simple hut, roofed with straw, walls made of tamped earth mixed with dry straw. Wind blows through the gaps, carrying up the dry smell of tobacco and cold hearth ashes. Your hands are still smeared with damp mud from yesterday morning, when you and a few others pulled a heavy cart from the river dock into the small market on the outskirts of the city. You no longer clearly know the name of the city. The worn signs, the yellowed walls, with faded writing and rumours stand in for maps. But you know this. Something is changing. Not a grand epic change. It's the cough slipping through the walls. It's the dead birds falling for no clear reason. It's the small lumps under the skin of one of the food carriers you saw the day before. They call it a bubo, tapping lightly on the swollen knot and moving on, as if that oddity were just ordinary. You begin the story by remembering that morning when everything was still indistinct. The sun hadn't risen high. Dew still clung to the grass, and the church bell echoed far off, long like a reminder that there was one more day to live. The people around you moved by habits deeply ingrained. Women carrying baskets, children running around the adults' legs, traders wrapping dirty cloth around their wares and shouting out their buying and selling. You step out of the hut, pull the blanket hidden under the bed over your shoulders, feeling the cold still sticking to your skin. Breakfast is a hard piece of bread and a bowl of thin broth. You chew slowly, letting the taste of bran and flour pass. Like a ritual, swallowing the hunger, holding on to the energy to keep going. People had been told, from generation to generation, that before the pandemic truly erupted, there were small signs, movements no one paid attention to. Few cared about a few dead rats in the corners of houses, or a boat returning from afar, carrying a strange, strong, fishy smell. You had heard merchants speak of a curse from the east, disease from the boat, unseen as fast as darkness. But that was something people told by the fire to make the children stay away from the riverside windows. You didn't think of it as a threat until the first person you knew, the one who had pulled the cart with you the day before, began to run a fever. His head was hot like coals. His hands trembled for no clear reason. On his neck, under his arms, the dark, hard swellings, like bruised grapes, grew as if the flesh itself were rebelling. They called for the healer. The healer came, carrying a worn cloth bag with some dried leaves, alcohol, and a grey salve. He placed his wrinkled hand on the sick man's forehead, then looked at you with eyes that seemed to want to ask, but his tongue did not speak. The sick man began to cough, a dry, simmering cough, like old wind whistling through a bamboo tube. And then, after a few hours, he lay still, his eyes wide open, but with no life in them. The healer said a word you had never heard clearly. The plague. You only heard it as a faint echo. And then people began to leave. His hut fell silent. They shoved some coarse cloth into his mouth to muffle any sound, then dragged him out of the village and buried him in a makeshift grave beyond the forest's edge. No one gave him a proper funeral. No one dared to look straight at him. You still remember the moment you came back, your hand trembling slightly. The bubo on your side hasn't done anything yet. You tell yourself, probably another fever, but at the edge of your thoughts there's a vague whisper, as if you're hearing an old story from inside the earth, that the unseen thing is spreading, and you're standing in its path. You meant to tell someone, but the stalls are starting to empty. People don't come to the market much anymore. Those who do arrive are tired, hollow-eyed, carrying the smell of tobacco and burnt dry grass. There is a heavy silence in the air, as if the whole street is holding its breath. You begin the habit of listening more than looking. Footsteps split into groups, the slow steps of the old, the quick ones of someone running, and sometimes the sharp slam of a door. As if someone had been startled. You know that something is not right, but you keep going. Because that's how life works. Today you get a little food. Maybe you survive tomorrow. You make use of the small things. Near the end of the morning, you pass a small house and see a woman wiping her tears. On the table are a few pieces of cloth wrapped up. Outside the door, a small sign reads, "Husband lost, begging someone to take these." You've seen things like that many times before, but today you feel something different. The absence of laughter has been completely replaced by a deep emptiness. You don't ask, you move on. At noon, a child in the village called you back. He is the child of the person you once helped stack food a few months earlier. His eyes were red, his nose running. "Mother won't wake up," he whispered. You didn't know what to do, so you just turned away, leaving those scraps of comfort in your head. Pray, lie down and rest. But you know prayer is just empty air while something is eating away. You went toward the well, drew a bucket of water, and tried not to think. Because if you started thinking, you would feel the horror. People like you, those without a loud voice, were being slowly shoved into the place of puppets being pulled, forced to watch each other die. And then silence. You forced your face to stay calm. You forced yourself not to feel the hunger that wasn't only in your belly, but also in your eyes. Your heart had begun to hear another whisper. Rumours. The disease spreads fast from boats, from doorways, from strangers, from touch. And part of you thought, maybe if I stay away from others, I'll be safe. But you could also hear more clearly. The breathing of the nearby neighbour was different, faster, more laboured. You didn't dare ask. You were busy. The act of living made you forget the question. The afternoon passed in a quiet loop. Eat, listen, notice, breathe, continue. As dusk fell, you returned to the hut with fatigue soaked into your bones. On the way, you saw a group of people gathered around a small well. Standing in the middle was an old merchant, the one who just a few weeks ago laughed, telling stories of trips to the eastern coast. Now he was silent, eyes dull. A few others were whispering something. "God is testing us," one said. "This is punishment," another said. The whole group didn't look up at you. You passed by, feeling the glances flicker, then falling into the hollow created by avoidance and caution. There was a question lodged at the back of your throat. Where will this end? But you swallowed it. Like one swallows saliva when there is nothing to eat. Night came. You sat close to the smouldering fire, adding a few dry straw pieces to keep the remaining ember from dying completely. You wondered, if I sleep, will I wake up tomorrow morning? Sleep was no longer just sleep. It was a gamble. You wrapped the blanket around yourself, heard the wind whistling through the cracks and tried to steady your breath. The whisper grew clearer. I am not a stranger. I am the spreading. I don't need a body to go. I travel with breath, with accidental touch, with thoughts laid down by fear. I am in the fence that surrounds you. You turned over, trying not to let yourself be drawn into images of the dead in dreams, but they still came, faint like smoke, as if you were looking at an old photograph blurred. You close your eyes, your breath slows, you whisper, don't try to make sense of everything. Let each scrap of memory slip in, let it flow like water, let it pass through you. Tomorrow will be different, or it won't. And then for a moment, you believe you can sleep peacefully. But before you fully let go, you hear a light knock from outside the hut. Not loud, nothing showy. A man, or maybe a girl, you can no longer tell clearly, whispers, someone just ran a fever. They told me not to come near. But I brought bread. The sound cuts off. The hut door closes. Silence returns. You wake with the same dull thirst in your throat. Early light seeps through the thatch, drawing pale streaks on the earthen floor. You look down at your arm. The small bubo has begun to show. A faint purple, like a faded ink blot. The sensation isn't painful at first, just a knowing that something is lying beneath the skin. That feeling makes you remember the whisper. I am in you, but you still have the choice of how to go on. Keep your breath, keep your routines, keep quiet. You wash your face with cold water drawn from the well, pat your cheeks lightly, and clear your head. You take some of the leftover herbs from the healer, crush them, and smear them onto the bubo with a subtle suspicion that it might not help, but at least it is action. Action to give yourself a sense of control. The rest of the day grew heavier. People no longer opened their shops. Children no longer ran and played in the street. The wall separating ordinary people and those bearing the signs seemed to form invisibly but surely. You hear that those with buboes must leave. Those with fever must be locked up. A word used to mean putting them in a small room, the wooden doors shut tight, and those outside not daring to look straight. A woman nearby, who had been a weaver, now closes the wooden door herself for her son, hands trembling, eyes red, quietly placing food outside and then moving away. Her son taps lightly on the door, voice weak. Mother. But she does not turn back. She bows her head. You see that moment. The moment when you know that mother is choosing between love and fear, and both are breaking her. Your story is not only about sickness, it is about the gaps between the words must do and cannot do. You begin to learn new rituals, not touching your face while talking, washing your hands with water mixed with ash, something you've seen people believe works, avoiding those passing through from other regions. No hugs, no kisses, no handshakes. You look down at your hands every time you touch anything, raise them, telling yourself just one wrong touch is enough. And then there are times you feel the loss. Your hands are no longer natural. They are wrapped in an invisible layer of caution, as if any movement could come at a cost. In the days that follow, you witness things that seem small, but gradually accumulate into a larger picture. A man being dragged out of his house in the middle of the night, hurried, no one crying. Candles burning thickly in another corner of the village. Some spontaneous ritual to stop the disaster. Younger people peek out, then quickly withdraw into the darkness. Something in you begins to change. From hesitation to remembering, then into preparation. You set aside a bit of food, keep a quiet corner for yourself, and learn how to retreat unnoticed. You don't tell anyone you're still alive. You just exist like a faint shadow. You also begin to remember things you previously didn't pay attention to. The old church melodies, abandoned midstream, fragmented laughter falling like dry leaves, the scent of perfume diluted by the smell of disinfectant, and the invisible vertigo of time. Days no longer passing according to any normal calendar. Everything feels covered by a thick mist. Each meal becomes a small ritual, anchoring you to the present. Once you sit before the well, listening to the flow of water. An unchanging sound, something that brings comfort. You think about those who are gone. You wonder, where did they go? Do they see anything? The answer never comes in words. It arrives as a faint sensation, like a breeze brushing your ear, letting you know that something has passed, but might never truly leave. Finally, on a foggy afternoon, you meet a stranger. He or she, still unclear because the cloth covering their face only reveals tired eyes, is sitting on the steps beside an ancient tree. In their hands is a roll of decayed paper, full of small writing. They extend a hand as if to give it to you, then withdraw. Their gaze holds you long in a way that reaches deep inside. And then they whisper, "Tell it, don't let anyone forget." You feel a kind of connection, like a reminder. Something inside you, the I hear part more than the I live part, nods. You don't yet know where to begin, but then you recall everything. The mornings, the breaths, the evasive movements. You quietly ask, "Which story?" And they give a thin smile, lips trembling. The story of surviving. The story that if it is not told, will be swallowed by silence. You sit down beside them, they hand you the old pen, dip it in ink and say, "Write, write in the language you still remember. Write as if speaking to yourself." And you begin. Not with flowery words, not with grand phrases, but with the way you breathe, walk, remember the cold of the morning, the burnt smell of straw, the creak of the wooden door, the bubo spreading slowly, and the silence after each cough. You write as if telling a story to a child about to sleep, but in every word there is an effort to hold on to the truth, the hunger, the fear, the silence. You write so you don't forget that your hand once shook when touching the closed door, that your eyes once saw the mother who didn't dare look at her child, that you once believed if you stayed silent you would be safe, but also knew that silence could make you a witness who couldn't save. And precisely while writing, you feel something different, not a letting go, but something lighter. The realization that telling does not mean reliving. Telling is keeping part of it from being erased. Night falls. You do not sleep until the ink on the paper spreads the last words. The stranger stands, takes the roll of paper, and gives you another piece, tiny, for you to keep. If someone asks, they say, "I saw, I felt, I am still here." Then they leave. You do not know where they came from. You only know that their light holds a little warmth into the coming days. Something you cannot call hope, but a connection. That you are not completely swallowed. You wrap the scrap of paper, place it under the thin cloth, and lie down. The bubo is still there, but you do not give it the right to take over. You breathe, you keep the rhythm, you hear your own story continue. And so from that point, you began to keep writing. Every day you added a passage. Every night you checked the bubo, noting the changes. Every morning you observed, not with panic, but with care. What had once been normal was now redefined. What had once been sharing was now a question. Should I reach out my hands? What had once been compassion now showed itself in leaving a bowl of hot porridge outside the door for a friend you knew was sick, then withdrawing into the shadows. You are not a hero. You are someone trying to keep a piece of yourself from falling out of time, and telling so that the other fallen pieces know they are not alone. When you begin to record the story, you think there is only one path, to keep the past days as a small collection of life being shaken. But then, as with everything in this time, that path branches. And you're no longer sure which direction to take. The bubo under the skin has grown a bit. Its colour has darkened, like diluted ink on old paper, and sometimes it aches, like a reminder that the unseen thing is inching forward. You begin to sense more. The feeling when a neighbour turns their back, the fleeting glance of the child when you give it some porridge, the knock on the door of those who come to check. The ones said to come to help, but actually to separate, classify, record names, then push away. You remember that morning when the bell calling everyone to gather rang out. It wasn't the bell of a festival or a happy day. It was an alarm bell, its echo stifled, like a cold hand pressed over the city's mouth. The head of the council was an old man, long white beard spilling down, dry lips, eyes darkening. He declared that the disease spreads through impurity and lack of faith, and that, to save the soul, the body must be kept isolated. His words moved like mist. They sounded grave, but no one truly understood all of it. He ordered those bearing the signs out of their homes to shut their doors tight and to hang a piece of black cloth on the door so passers-by would know. They called it a caution marker. You saw that each time such a cloth appeared, the silence around that house thickened. People began whispering that some of those who were quarantined never returned. Some houses with black cloth were left empty. No one came, no one laughed, and after a few days those cloths became ragged, hanging limp like an unspoken warning. You also witnessed what they call the new hygiene. People set up rituals to cleanse, burning bundles of dried herbs, sprinkling ash on thresholds, washing hands with diluted spirits, and wearing small wooden boxes stuffed with herbs hung around the neck. Those who cannot afford the herbs take leaves, hold them over fire, and inhale, as if the scent could push back whatever has crept into the lungs. You ask yourself, what in those rituals is real, and what is just a desire for control? You see people believing, and you begin to believe in part, simply because belief makes you feel like you're doing something. It's a gentle self-deception, a thin garment to cover the emptiness inside. But then you realise what helps does not always bring life. There is a nearby house. The owner is a carpenter to whom you once gave a piece of bread when he was sick. That day he had a fever. A group of caretakers came. They wore thick coats, their faces covered, carrying wooden boards to move him. They took him outside, put him into a large basket, and dragged him away. A day later they returned, removed the basket, and found him lying motionless. They wrote his name on a wooden board. Gone. No one cried. A woman stood waiting beside. His wife. Eyes bright red but unmoving. She handed you a small piece of cloth, shook her head, then pulled the water jar away, as if keeping what she thought was a safe distance. You feel your chest tighten. The pain goes out. Not from the loss, but from seeing a person become a shadow. Days go by, and the separation spreads like mould. The reasoning, if he bears the sign, "Don't go near," becomes new rules. Whoever has a fever must not leave the house. Whoever is suspected is recorded, and whoever is marked is counted. One afternoon you see a child dragged out into the middle of the market. He doesn't have obvious buboes, but his face is flushed, his eyes dull. A man in the coat of the inspectors tells his mother, "I'm sorry, he must be isolated." The mother holds the child, bows her head, then lets go. The child screams, but the mother does not react. The man takes the child into a small room, locks the door, and leaves. All evening you hear soft crying through the walls. No one intervenes. The next morning the child is no longer screaming. The door is opened. The mother sits upright like a shadow, eyes empty, and people whisper, "He's gone." Then you realise isolation is just putting someone on a boat with no harbour to arrive at, falling into silence without a proper burial. What you once called the habit of living is now rebuilt into a new reflex. You learn to tell the difference between a normal cough and the cough of those about to be gone. You learn to breathe lighter, as if not wanting to disturb the air around you. You learn to look without staring. You learn to set food outside the door, knock lightly, then retreat before the recipient can fully see you. Some nights you ask, if I help someone bearing the sign, am I hastening their death, or am I dragging myself into it? That contradiction lives in every small action. When you rub herbs on your bubo, you tell yourself you are protecting yourself, but the rest of you knows you're trying to stretch out something already rotting from within. And then you are pulled into an event no one wants to speak of, the day the coffins are buried without proper rites. They call it the night of burial without a word. At first it's a few scattered small graves. Then one afternoon, when the sky is dim and rain falls like dust, there's a call. Gather! A group of men from nearby villages arrive with shovels, wagons, and a small crate containing slips of paper with names. They don't use wool or cloth. They take the bodies out, lay them on coarse cloth, and drop them straight into a large pit. 5, 10, 20. No one reads names, no one offers prayers. They cover the earth, then slip away quietly. They call it silent disappearance. You are forced to help. They say, if you don't help, you'll be the next one dragged. You scoop soil, throw it up, watch the layer settle, see a child's hand being buried. You wonder if you should keep something for them, something to remember. A small shoe, a printed scrap of cloth, a button. But then you bury it all. You know keeping anything could make you suspect, punished. Silence is safe, and silence is a burden. The feeling when you drive the shovel down, the bottom of the pit trembling from so many bodies, and the earth covering like the last spoken word being swallowed. In the nights that follow, the dreams about the corpses do not stay still. They are not demons. They are voids, blurred shapes you cannot distinguish. They come not to harm you, but as a reflection of your own powerlessness. You see again the face of the mother holding the child, the carpenter who has died, the weaver woman who does not turn back to look at her child, and the evening when you buried without daring to keep anything. You wake with the smell of damp earth in your nose, your hands dirty, your heart heavy. And the whispering voice, the you that is not of the body, the one you've heard from the beginning, whispers, "It's not your fault. But if you don't tell, who will remember?" You do not answer. You continue to write. Many people begin to act differently. Some devotees follow the winding crowds out into the streets, beating themselves to purge sin, believing that physical pain will cleanse the soul and keep the disease away. The scene is like a slow sequence of music, blood dripping into the ground, unending groans, and the tears of those watching. Once you pass such a group, they wear white garments, each with hands tied behind their back, using their own skin to lash their backs until the flesh tears, and they whisper please, as if God will see the scars and overlook everything. Others rush to temples, filling small bowls with water and oil, placing them before the saint's statue, and lighting candles. The priest stands there, eyes caught between exhaustion and faith, reciting old prayers, as if the words could hold together something that is breaking. Then you hear about the collectors. They don't wear special clothes, have no religious marks, but their voices are soft, and the silence that comes from them makes you feel cold. They come, knock on doors, ask, "Who has the sign?" People bring out lists, they check, write down names, then say, "Bring them out tomorrow." Those called retreat. Some try to hide. An old woman living alone tries to block the door. They open it, look into her eyes, then pull back. They leave with a different name. Her house is silent after that. You learn that hiding is not always effective for long. But sometimes it is a precious gap between death and continuation. You also begin to meet others who are keeping their stories. One night while you're sitting writing on a new page, a young girl bursts into your hut, anxious eyes gasping. She hands you a scrap of paper, shaky handwriting, telling of the village she came from, where they herded everyone into an old church to fight the disease. They locked the doors, wouldn't let anyone out, and believed that if they stayed inside, the sickness wouldn't pass. Those who bore the sign were dragged out and placed beneath the floorboards. No one brought them food. They died in silence. She ran away, and now she needs a place to hide. She looks at you, then whispers, "Give me a place. I'll pay you back with the story." You don't ask too many questions. You conceal her in a dark corner, give her some thin porridge, and she begins to speak. The story she tells is not meant to frighten you. It is a connection. She tells of a mother who kept her child close for days, tending it with warm water, and finally watched it die in her arms. Of a blacksmith who was marked, who hanged himself from a tree because he refused to be taken. Of a priest who refused to leave his sickbed, saying that if God wanted the soul, the priest would go with it. She doesn't tell you to judge, she tells you to listen. You write down every detail, without editing. You know her story will weave into yours. The two are braided together, and if someone one day finds the pages, they will see a broader picture. She places her hand over yours, tenderly, then closes her eyes and sleeps. You leave her there, cover her with a thin cloth and sit guard. One day, a child from the east comes. It looks at you in a different way. Not afraid, not too hungry, just curious, with a black scarf wrapped around its head. It pulls you out of the hut, pointing to the narrow road leading out of the village. Someone said that if you go toward the southern river, there's a place where they no longer see the signs. It whispers. You've heard rumours like that many times. If you leave the city, the disease won't follow. If you reach the holy place. If you drink from that spring. If you perform this ritual. But the child's voice carries no superstition. It speaks like an option. My father went. He says there are survivors there. But he didn't want me to go alone. You look into its eyes. You hear the whisper in your head. If you leave, what do you leave behind? If you stay, you slowly lose yourself. It pulls you one step further. And you, between the fatigue, between the recording, between the spreading bubo, you slowly shake your head. We don't know anything about that yet. It doesn't argue. It just shrugs, pulls out from under its clothes a worn piece of cloth and gives it to you. If you stay, keep this. It helps steady your breathing. You smile slightly. You take it. It leaves. You watch its figure fade. And for a moment you wonder, if I follow, what will the story become? You stay. Something clings tight, not out of fear, but because of the instinct to record. The feeling that if you leave now, the pages you're holding will be abandoned, and people like the young girl will become nameless in a chaos. But you have just seen another path, another choice, and that awakens a flutter. If you stay too long, you will become something no longer the storyteller, but just ink-stained paper. If you go, you carry the story with you. Free it. You don't know the exact definition of free. You only know that from within the silence. Another whisper comes. I will give you one thing. Tell not to hold. Tell to release. And if needed, take the story with you. That is another kind of life. Then a new wave comes, knocks on the door in the afternoon, a sight not common before. A group of people in ragged clothes leading a few thin horses bring along a man in poor condition. He appears to be a cleric. The sign of the cross on his chest is faded. His eyes carry deep fatigue. They say he is a pilgrim. They say he comes from a far region, bringing prayers, and that he asks for shelter for one night. The way they speak makes you feel something is off. You look closely at his hands. There are marks like small buboes, but not quite. There is a difference, like old scars. He sits by the fire, takes out an old book and begins to read. The language isn't entirely the same as what you've heard in the nearby church. Sometimes he stops, looks at you and whispers, "Tell it, your story and mine are weaving together." You say nothing. The pilgrim gives a thin smile. I know what is moving. I've heard it whisper too. It isn't entirely an enemy. It's a mirror. Be careful naming it. Names have power. You sense the difference. Not everyone views the sickness with pure fear. Some look at it as an existence they want to understand. He offers something. If you leave, take this book. It has a few lines recorded from places where the lights went out. And if you keep writing, give me a copy. You listen, put it away, and give him a few lines of the story you've written. He nods. I will continue, and if you need to go, I will help point the way. Then he sleeps. The next morning he's gone. No trace, only a few pages copied of what he said, and a feeling as if he left a piece of himself in the fact that you are telling. You've learned how to live through the dark days, not by believing there will be a quick end, but by motions repeated until automatic. Recording, observing, avoiding touch, and keeping silent. But something else has begun to slip into the space between those actions. A vague question, like a deep breath you don't dare admit. If I leave here, will the story go with me? If I stay, will I become part of the silence I'm recording? The young woman, the one who has given you so many accounts, lies still under the thin cloth. Her eyes sometimes half open in sleep, and sometimes you hear her whisper something indistinct. One night she wakes, sits up slowly, places her hand on yours as a way to check that you're still there. Today, she says in a quiet voice, I can give you something. Not enough to save everything, but enough to prolong. She closes her eyes, then sits up, takes from her bag an old piece of cloth soaked in a bitter, fragrant liquid, and gives it to you. This is a method she taught. She was the healer on a small street to the west. When the sign first appeared, She took leaves from a tree growing by the ditch, crushed them with ash from fire and alcohol, wrapped them in cloth, and pressed it on the hot spot. It doesn't push the disease away, but it reduces the fever, slows the heart, makes a person alert enough to drink water and hold their breath. When she died, I kept the recipe. Someone should carry it farther. I cannot leave. But you can carry it along with the story. You take the piece of cloth, feeling the leftover warmth in the corner, the smell of smoke and leaves, and know that it's an act both simple and dangerous. If others see, they'll suspect you have the skill of intervention, something that easily turns into suspicion of concealment. You ask yourself, if I use it on the girl, if I use it on myself, will people call that a betrayal of the isolation rules or a life saved? And you keep that question, apply the cloth to her hands, gently rub it over the skin where her bubo seems to be. Then watch. She sighs, her lips curling slightly. The fever lessens. She grabs your hand. I will tell more, she whispers. But don't give it to anyone besides me. They won't understand. You begin to fold it into the story. Not just describing, but recording how to make it. The dry and bitter scent. The feeling of the cloth pressed against skin. The soft hiss as heat spreads. You place it in the middle of the page, like a small piece held by characters, so that if someone later finds it, they can still touch the old knowledge. Sustenance for life, not superstition. Then the child from the east appears once more, its frame smaller, clothes torn, but eyes sharp. It gives you a piece of dried earth wrapped in cloth, as a thank you for last time. My father says, it says, if one person keeps the story, they should share with others a part of what keeps breath. This is a piece of earth from where there is a spring. There, water is drawn from an old canal, and when you drop in a bit of sea salt and a few blades of grass, that water makes breathing a little easier. My father doesn't believe in miracles, but believes in the layers of something called calm. Take it. If you go, give it to others. If you stay, keep it for the girl. You look into the child's eyes, no discussion. You nod. The decision is in your fingers. Keep or give. You put the piece of earth into a small chest, place it under the cloth, and then write. It becomes part of the new layer of the story. The story of sharing not in grand gestures, but bit by bit. The piece of earth, the scrap of cloth, the spoken word. Spoken. One rainy afternoon, when the sun showed faint behind the damp clouds, the pilgrim returned. Not noisy. You knew he appeared before you saw him. That light feeling, as if someone placed a hand on your shoulder, as if there were a thin connection between the stories. He sat, reached into his cloak and pulled out something. A thin metal pen with old touch marks, and a piece of paper that had once been folded. I heard you tell, he said, eyes glinting. I've also carried a part. In the places I've been, people leave, leaving a few lines behind. Today I bring you a help. A question. He unfolded the paper and drew a rough map on it. The southern river, a strangely shaped tree, a place with a less frequent sign. There, how he whispered, is a small community. They keep quiet. They also record. They have someone who has survived longer than most. They don't stay completely silent. They pass things on. If you want, go. Your story can connect with theirs. The girl's story can be shared. And if you don't go, then continue. I leave this part so you don't forget that something else exists. You sit still. You feel the weight, not of fear, but of choice lightly tapping at your chest. You carefully copy the map, writing down the names of landmarks. Big tree broken in half. Stone with a crack shaped like an eye. Wooden house overgrown with moss. Place without a clear sign. The pilgrim looks at you, and for the first time you see a softness in his eyes. When I passed through, I heard a different whisper. It doesn't always say don't leave. Sometimes it says tell it, go to keep telling. He didn't stay long. The next morning he was gone. On the table remained a small handwritten scrap of paper reading, if you go to that place, bring the girl's story with you. Don't let it be closed. You fold the paper, place it between the pages of the notebook, and continue writing. Not just about the map, but about the feeling when another door is opened, not to escape the plague, but to extend the reach of something being passed along, the story. The following day, a new development appears in the village. A weaver, the one who makes most of the black cloth hung over doors, is called because of the sign. They shut the workshop, hang a large black cloth, and place a chair outside. People begin sending new pieces of cloth, and someone silently wraps an old piece carefully. The weaver is not taken away immediately. He's allowed to stay, but is told not to leave the workshop. One day you bring him some porridge. He looks at you, hands trembling, and says, "You write, put what I know into it." He takes out a worn piece of cloth, sorrowful. "I used to make that marker. It wasn't just a signal. It was an assumption. I forgot the way people once used cloth to hide and to hold. Today I want to say, not everyone carrying something is ultimate danger. There are those who are just wearing something they themselves do not understand. They are afraid. Write it down. Give them a soft voice. You write. You add to the story his words. The cloth is not only a symbol of fear, but sometimes a garment hiding weakness and loneliness. People begin to reread the pages you've written. Some take out a small piece, read it, then look out onto the street. You discover that the more cautious ones are beginning to look at the marks with a different gaze. Not entirely avoidance, but observation, guessing, and then sometimes silent aid. A bowl of porridge placed outside a door, a light cloth draped over a window, a whisper of "try to keep warm." Small changes, but they are another quiet shard in the sea of silence. Then a cold snap comes. Fevers deepen with a skin-cutting chill. The young woman coughs lightly, and you call for the pilgrim who instructed you. Not because you're sure he will return, but because you need someone to witness how helplessness turns into action. He appears as if he always passes by without leaving a clear trace, and gives you a small carved piece of wood. This is a token from that place. They use it to mark someone who has shared. It says, "I have seen, I acknowledge, I connect." Place it near where she lies. When she holds her breath, let her look at it. You place the piece of wood beside her. She holds it, closes her eyes, and that night sleeps a little more deeply. In the morning she looks at you, gives a weak smile. "I feel that I am not alone." You add to the story the symbol, how it was carved, and whisper, "When others look, they don't understand." But someone later might find that that small presence kept someone alive one more morning. By now something has changed in you. What was once mere recording is now a braided thread. Between the girl and you, between the child and the pilgrim, between the weaver and the cloth, between you and yourself, the story is branching, converging, forming a web. And that web lightens in part the burden you once felt when burying without words. You begin to understand that when you take the story outward, you're not only leaving evidence of death, you carry a piece of life. The choices, the small gestures, the silent whispers. You whisper to yourself, "Tomorrow I will decide. I will go or stay. I will take the story out or keep it where it's known." You roll up a portion of paper, take the healing cloth, the earth from the child, the pilgrim's token, and hide them in a small box. You place the box beside the girl, like a silent promise that if the worst comes, these small things will remain. Dawn comes slowly, without noise. Thin light pierces the damp clouds, laying over the lingering mists from last night like a thin veil. You wake with the feeling that your whole body is stretched between two lines, staying with the place where you have woven a network of stories, or going to the place the pilgrim drew on the map. A fewer signs community, where perhaps your story will not be kept in a dark corner, but connected, extended, living on in the breath of others. The girl in the corner of the hut opens her eyes when you shift. She frowns, lifts her hand to touch the carved wooden token still beside her, then turns to look at you. You intend to go? She asks, voice not strong but with a quiet space between words, as if she is weighing each one. You don't answer immediately. You take out the notebook, open to the nearest page where the map is drawn, and place your hand on the faded ink line. She watches. I don't want you to go alone, she whispers. But I also don't want you to leave, so the story dies slowly here. You pull a small chair, set it nearer to her. I will not go without leaving something, you say. You take out a small pre-written cloth piece, place it over her head like a light cover, then draw a short line on the page, writing, "If I do not return, open the story and continue. Let those who come know I was here. Place my mark beside the wooden token. So they know. Not just a sign, but speech." She nods. Her eyes gather a little moisture, but she says nothing more. She gives you a small part of the blanket, a scrap of fabric carrying the scent of the night's kept watch, an object with no value beyond having been there, and says, "Take this. When you go, know that a part of me is with you. When you tell, add what I have told. When you listen, do not forget to listen for me." You wrap up several things, the notebook thickening day by day, the map with handwritten notes, the healing cloth, wrapped carefully so it is not wet, does not give off too obvious trace, the child's earth, and the pilgrim's wooden token. You tuck a small cord into your shirt pocket, a rough braided ring the girl gave, as a silent reminder. Return or continue. As you leave her place, looking back once, she closes her eyes as if sending a prayer without words. You sling the bag over your shoulder, pull the hood low, and step outside. The village has awakened. The silence is woven from many small sounds. People dragging goods, children breathing with difficulty, old women whispering to each other as they watch you. Not overtly avoiding, but observing from a distance. You pass a few houses still hanging black cloths, some torn, some fresh. In a corner the weaver watches, then gives a slight nod, as a way of acceptance. The story is moving. You do not go straight along the main road. The pilgrim marked quiet landmarks. The large tree broken in half lying across the narrow path. A stone, with a crack like an eye. An old bridge over a small stream. You follow those marks, keeping silent, sometimes stopping to listen to the wind, to hear your own breath, to make sure you are not being pulled back by something else, by emotion, by regret, by the whisper, "Turn back, we need you to stay." You pass empty fields, more widely spaced houses, and feel most clearly something different. Not that here there are no signs of disease, but the attitude. In some places people hang small white cloth beside the door, not to mark someone isolated, but to note, heard. A middle-aged woman steps out from a wooden door, holding a bowl, watches you approach, then stops. "You carry the sign," she says, her eyes not gliding past as before, but pausing, as if seeing a thread. She reaches out and you give her the healing cloth and the dried earth. She lays them gently, asks nothing. "Sit," she tells you. The story bearer always needs to eat before continuing to tell. You sit. She ladles you a bowl of thin porridge, faint herbal scent. A bit of mint, a bit of dried grass. As you eat, she turns toward the doorway, speaks quietly to someone else in the house. The other brings out a thick notebook, dusted with fine powder, the cover interlaced with many symbols. "They are listening," she whispers. "We don't keep complete silence. I heard the pilgrim speak of someone who would come. I thought that someone was you." You feel something lift, not simply because of being welcomed, but because of the quiet connection, like seeing a thread from the part of the story in your hands weaving into a broader cloth. "I am the one carrying the story," you reply. "I came to listen and to give." The old woman smiles, cracked lips but bright eyes. "Here, we call people like you lamp keepers. The story doesn't go out when someone holds it. Come in, there is a place for you to write. But first you must tell me, What have you heard, and what do you carry? You set the notebook on the table, open to the first page and begin to speak. Not everything at once, but beginning with the path taken, the girl in the hut, the pilgrim's instruction, the token, and how small pieces like the earth and cloth helped keep breath. The listeners do not interrupt. They copy, nod, sometimes whisper words you don't need to understand immediately. When you finish, the old woman gives you a pen, braided from old feathers, dipping it in ink. Right here, she says. We keep it. And if you set out again, take back some of what we have added. You write, and as you write, you feel something gentle radiating. Not magic, but another weight. The sense that the story is no longer only in your head, but being placed into others' hands, becoming something transmissible without being lost. That afternoon, a small group guides you on a tour. They show you the big broken tree, where once a man stood to hide a group from going, into the main yard when the first wave came. The touch mark on its trunk, an old knife scar, is the sign of the one who told. They show you a small grave, not hidden, but above it no scattered bones. People place small stones, each inscribed briefly. I once lived. I was heard. I am not forgotten. A younger person, the old woman's son, gives you another scroll. This is part of what they call the network. Each person who comes, each story, is added. When you go, take this, and if you return, bring it back. On the scroll are small lines written by many. Advice, cures, symbols, a summary they call the principles of holding breath. You realise this place is not perfect. They still have people with signs, still must isolate, still witness death. But there is a difference in endurance, not silence alone, but a shared silence, and a continuation not lost. As dusk falls, they give you a small place to sleep in the far room of the story house, a small compartment with a table, a few damp papers, and a flickering oil lamp. Before you sleep, the old woman comes, puts her hand on your shoulder. Tomorrow, she says, I will tell you more about the path ahead. There was another who went. That one carried the story across the riverbank. That one did not return. But you can. Not because I believe in miracles, but because I believe in something else. What you're passing on doesn't entirely touch death. It touches continuation. You lie down, hand holding the notebook. The girl's voice in the hut. The image of her placing the cloth on her forehead passes through your mind. You write a small entry leaving, I have come to what they call the network. They know what I carry. They do not demand the story back as debt. They invite it in. You fold it, tuck it into the notebook. That night in sleep you dream of pages opening, and from them the people you met. The girl, the child, the weaver, the pilgrim. No longer alone. Their stories lengthen, weaving together, forming a layered map, not just of geography, but of choices, whispers, touches. You wake to a soft knock at the door. A young person stands there, carrying a small bag. Inside it, a few new cloth pieces and another notebook. They say you are the lamp keeper, they say. I bring what they've added as a token to help someone with the sign not get completely lost. They ask, will you continue? You look outside, where the sky is about to brighten, and you know the choice is ahead. You can stay, learn deeper, give guidance to others who come, or you can continue, carrying the girl's story, the map, this community story farther, to other quiet places, or to places that must be reconnected. You stuff the notebook, the scroll, and the token into your bag. They are heavy, not from the number of pages, but from responsibility. You take another pen, write a few lines. If I do not return, know that. Carry the story to places I did not yet know. Add what you have. Give the next person a place to write. You fold it, hand the new scroll to the young one. Bring it to the girl, you say. Let her know. I have not forgotten. They nod, then withdraw. You stand at the doorway, take a deep breath, not to forget, but to keep rhythm. The story lies in the bag, in each step. You step out, this time not alone. There are new threads tied to you, tugging lightly from behind. The community's whispers, the recorded tokens, and something like a silent promise that if you go on, you do not leave a part behind, but carry more. Spread them, pass them on. The misty road stretched out before you with no clear end. Each step was not just movement forward, but carrying a part of what had once lain silent behind you. Lines of writing, symbols, promises, and the faint warmth of those who stayed. You were not walking to escape. You walked because what you carried should not be kept in a dark corner anymore. It had to flow. It had to meet others, be heard, added to, and then move on. In the first days after leaving the network, you passed through wilder areas. Ragged grass grew along the way. Some dried flowers clung with dew, and the rare cry of birds hung in the cold air. You kept silence by habit, not to hide your presence, but because you had learned that silence was the clearest way to listen. There were times you stopped, opened the notebook, sketched a bit more, noted a detail. The way wind through cracked leaves sounded like whispers, or a strange timbre from afar, like someone calling a name indistinctly. On the third afternoon after departing, you reached a sparse forest where the narrow path narrowed into a dusty trail. Between two rows of trees stood an undecorated wooden gate, moss-covered, bearing a simple emblem, two curves overlapping like intersecting streams. Under the gate sat a middle-aged man, thin frame, dark circled eyes, leaning against a post holding a long staff. When you approached, he didn't ask your identity. He just silently observed the pack you carried, then looked up at the bumpy notebook on your back. "You carry a lot," he said. His voice was hoarse but without contempt, only long-standing recognition. The cloth, the ink, and the story. I see fresh ink. Only those who keep for long know how ink spreads when it's damp. You introduced yourself slowly, briefly told of the road, of the place where people called you lamp keeper, of the token, and that you were continuing onward. He nodded in time with your telling, then lightly tapped his staff on the ground as if to hold the sound. "Here," he said, "we call people like you connectors. I keep this gate not to block anyone, but to know what they carry. The story is not just words. It is what makes people remember each other by scent, by scars, by a look that doesn't forget. Do you want to rest inside or just leave something before going on?" You looked into your bag. The small box contained the healing cloth, the child's earth, the written pages, all wrapped carefully. You produced a small portion, a shorthand paper describing how to make the fever-reducing mixture, copied from the young woman, and the pilgrim's small token, not to give away but to let him know you came not just to take, but to share. He took it, read, then placed it on the hanging line by the gate, a place where passers-by leave small messages as a way to record traces. He led you through the gate into an open space where several huts made of wood and cloth stood, surrounded by woven baskets of dried food and the small marks of long presence. A wooden table with papers pinned around its edge, a few cracked etched jars, and a neat stack of firewood. A middle-aged woman came to greet you. She held a small tray with pale yellow tea. She invited you to sit without many questions. "I'm Mira," she introduced, voice light as wind. "Connector, come. I've heard of the network. I keep the sick here. Keep the stories. We have our own way to distinguish who to avoid, not relying solely on outward signs. I listen to breaths, warmth, the breath in spasms. Where do you go next?" You sat, drank the tea. Its mild bitterness mixed with slight sweetness eased you a bit. You recounted the pilgrim, the girl, the village with the white cloth, and how their stories were not preserved as ornaments but nurtured. Mira listened, her eyes probing each line you spoke, then gently lifted a small jar containing a fine powder blend. I have something, she said. Not to cure all, but to hear. When someone comes, I give them to inhale, not smoke, but something ground from a root to soothe the airways, making their breathing even so I can hear them clearer. And I record how that breath changes day by day. What else do you carry? I want to know. You opened your bag, took out the notebook and offered it to her. She placed her hand on the page, touched the lines and closed her eyes slightly as if sensing. I see, she said. Your story doesn't just fill, it opens other places for me to hear. A part of you lies in their breath, and a part of them clings to what you carry. The afternoon passed with stories exchanged in a different rhythm. Mira showed you the basics of listening, how they differentiate breaths of those near the boundary between living and fading, how they use light cloth ties on wrists to measure pulse vibrations nightly, and how they place a small stone under a sick person's pillow, not as a mourning mark, but a gentle touch to signal. I am here. I am still breathing. You recorded each method, adding to your notebook the new terms they used: silent line, wind in the lungs, pause mark. As dusk fell, another young person arrived. He pulled a small cart loaded with paper, ink, and cloth pieces marked with hand signs. He introduced himself as Tolan, the one who brings the connecting lines between father connectors. He asked you about the girl, in detail about the wooden token and the pilgrim's instructions. As you recounted, he nodded, then produced a new scroll, placing it on the table. On it was an extension of the network, a small system to send quick notes between groups like this. Not by large parcels, but brief signs. Short records so the next person would know who had come, who held on, who should be watched, and who needed another connector. I'll carry your part, Tolan said. And if you go on, I'll reserve space for this story elsewhere. But one thing. He paused, looked at you. Along the way, people might meet those who don't want the story to spread. Not everyone wants continuation. Some in the region believe silence is the block. They believe telling invites something. What do you think? You recalled other silences. The weaver woman, the isolated children without cries, the white signs that meant heard. You didn't answer immediately. You wrote a short note. Telling is not summoning. Telling is remembering. Those who do not wish to hear, I leave them be. Those who need, I give. Tolan placed his hand on your shoulder, nodding gently. That is how connectors live, he said. I want to add, if you go on, take this record. They will know someone came and did not leave only dry silence. Night came. Mira gave you a small corner in the hut to continue writing. You sat with the flickering lamp, added to a new page. The route here. The distinctive smell of the forest, Tolan's whispers, and the subtle difference between listening and analysing. You closed a small section at the end of the page. A message back to the girl. I have met others tending the network. They listen, they record, they don't force. They gave me space to continue writing. When I go, I will carry their part elsewhere. You rolled the note, attached it in the notebook as a marker. The next morning before departure, Mira approached you. She took a dark strip of cloth, embroidered small lines, a symbol unlike any you had seen before, a combination of a protective circle and a dot in the centre, and tied it around your neck. When you are elsewhere, she said, people will look at this and know, I heard. I know what you carry, not to verify, but to say, I believe. You touched the cloth, feeling its rough but warm texture, then nodded. You left with a thicker notebook, a small network extension, and a lighter feeling. Not because fear was less, but because you had added something. You weren't just carrying your story anymore. You carried the means for it to live on elsewhere, and the mark for others to recognise. That a connector had come, given, and returned a piece. As the path exited the forest, you glanced back a few times. In the thin morning light, you saw Mira standing silently at the entrance, some child helping stack firewood, and Tolan sitting beside a new pile of papers. They didn't call out, they only nodded. That nod was like a word. Go on, carry the story. You stepped into the mist again. Inside your bag, among the pages and tokens, was a new piece of paper, Mira's handwriting. Listen deep, give without demand. Discern who holds silence out of fear, and who holds it because they don't know what to say. The story lives when there is a connector. You shook your head as if to keep that sound in your mind, then went. The next road would lead you to a small valley where a village nestled against a hill. On the way you came upon a group carrying a woman with a sign. They did not turn away. They placed her on a stretcher, eyes sad but not abandoning. The younger ones whispered, and an old man from behind stepped forward, shaking his head as if to preserve quiet. Then looked at you, not asking, but inviting you in. You approached. The old man pointed to the woman lying on the stretcher, then extended his hand. "You are a connector?" he asked. You nodded. He looked at the cloth around your neck, the embroidered mark of belief. He gave a slight smile. "I've heard of people like you. Here, we don't have much paper, we have breaths, let me hear." You lowered your bag, took out a small part. A healing cloth, the line about how Mira listens, and a few instructions on placing the stone under the pillow so others would know the one lying there was not abandoned. The old man took them, placed his hand on the woman's forehead, then opened a corner of the healing cloth, pressed gently. She breathed lightly, eyes half open, and something like a deep breath, not large but enough for you to hear. You sat, listened to that breath. It wasn't steady. It mingled with a soft hiss, but there was a slight stability. The old man turned to you, his gaze worn. "You carry the story. Place your hand here. What do you hear?" You placed your hand on her chest, the other on her back, and tried to distinguish the breath. You remembered how Mira called it the pause mark, the gap between inhale and exhale. And that gap changes day by day if one continues to live. You whispered, "There's a small place. It's expanding. It's not narrowing." The old man nodded, then handed you a small carved wooden piece. "This is a holding point. People place it beside someone slowly stabilizing. It is not a promise. It is a sign for others to know, I have been here. I was heard." You recorded it. You left after leaving a few short lines. Came, helped. Woman's breath eased a little. Placed the stone. Placed the mark. The old man closed the small door, watched you fade away. The road repeated thin waves of mist, and each step made you hear more clearly the small drum in your chest. Not out of fear, but something like the echo of days gone by, of faces layered over your name on the pages. You left the network with a part of them, and now the story is bringing you to a place where breath and silence seem even more fragile than the fog. A small valley hidden by low hills, where people say there is a community that keeps breath in its own way. As you enter, the village is unlike any other before. Houses are neatly arranged, mossy tiled roofs, but there are no black cloths hung out as signs of despair. Instead, on thresholds, there are pale grey strips of cloth, not to warn but to invite. Someone hangs a small bell beside the door lock. When the wind blows, it rings faintly. That is a signal to arrivals that there is someone here listening. The smell of herbs mingles in the air, not to mask sickness, but as the background of care. Dried mint leaves, crushed licorice root, and something mixed with honey to hold warmth. You step into the small common house in the centre of the village. A shared room with a few wooden chairs, a long table stained with old ink, and scrolls tied with rough twine. A middle-aged woman with silvering hair but nimble hands invites you to sit. On the table is a paper note. "Lampkeeper, leave a mark. If not, listen." She introduces herself as Lysa. When you present Mira's token, she touches it lightly, then places her hand on your chest, as if touching an invisible bridge. "Connector from another network," she says, voice admonishing like to a child going far. "We don't have much paper. We have enough to listen." Your story. Tell it first. I'll give you a corner to do the rest. You begin to tell. Not the entire journey, but the connection points. The girl in the hut. The wooden token. The map. The fever reduction method. And how they placed the stone to mark I'm still here. Those in the room, a few elders, a young man listening intently with wet eyes, a child sucking their thumb, listen. Someone taps lightly on the tabletop each time you pass a segment, and that person writes a few simple words in chalk on the hanging board. Listen, share, send. Lysa responds by giving you a small piece of cloth to cover, a plain scarf, but along the edge are embroidered lines, an open mouth with tiny drops inside. This, she says, we call it the whisper cloth. When someone shows stronger signs, irregular breath, heated anger, we place it beside them. It doesn't cover, it records. When they exhale, the cloth absorbs that part of the wind, and others know, I hear, I'm coming. I won't leave you alone. I want you to add to the notebook how they react when it's placed, when they realise someone is coming. I need continuations. You copy it down, feeling the new weight of the expanding story. No longer just you alone, carrying fragments from place to place, but a subtle system. Small signals, objects passed hand to hand, ways to hear each other without speaking. You inhale, tasting the herbal scent of the tea Lysa offered. Then say, back there, an old man guards a gate. He calls himself a connector. He gave a map, a message, and said there's another place waiting. I carry a part of them. They gave me a part of themselves. We are weaving. A child in the corner, seemingly not overly concerned with the presence of the sick, speaks up. People here say if they stay silent, the disease won't hear. They think if they don't tell, it will retreat by itself. Its voice is innocent, but in its eyes is something learned. I think the story helps me see others still there. Another woman, about your age, with faded scars on her wrists from old bindings, shakes her head. Silence saves no one, she says bluntly. I heard about a riverside neighbourhood that kept silent for a whole month. They told nothing. They went nowhere. They died gradually with no one coming. Their story became a gap. Those who came after didn't know they had once been here. You record that statement. Just a few words, but it adds a piece of light into the grey background. Silence may hold for a moment, but it also covers by making others unaware of how to help. Your story, along with Mira's, the pilgrims, is now touching that, without forcing but saying, I am here, I hear, I continue. The afternoon passes. As shadows lengthen, footsteps sound outside. A group arrives carrying a man lying still on a stretcher, his skin pale, eyes half open but dull. On his forehead is a sheen of sticky sweat. By habit you smell, not to judge but to hear as they taught. His breath is mixed. A hitch, then a long pause. Lysa sits nearby, takes the whisper cloth, places it beside him. The woman with scars lays a hand on his chest, as if measuring the rhythm. This, she says softly, near the border. I'm going to give him what we call the open rest. They don't call it a miracle. They call it focused attention. The man gradually calms. You note, the pause in breath opens. The stone beneath the pillow has been placed. They look at each other. No one speaks loudly, but something changes. From about to go out to still here. You add, when they place the whisper cloth, they whisper back, I hear, I'm coming. I won't leave you alone. Night comes and they invite you to stay. There is a small room for temporary connectors. A mat, a corner with ink and paper. Before sleep, Lysa comes, giving you one more small thing, a thin cord woven with fine silver thread. This isn't for identification, she says, but connection. When you tie it onto the notebook, people will know, the storykeeper added. If you put it elsewhere and another connector sees it, they know. I touched it. It's like a past handprint. You take it, wrap the cord around the spine of the notebook, and quietly watch it reflect the firelight. In sleep, you dream of the girl in the hut. She's not actually there, but the image of her placing the cloth on her forehead appears clear. She gives you a new piece of paper, shaky handwriting. I've heard about that place. They call you a connector. I'm better. I hear new sounds. People say there's a different symptom. Not just buboes, but a deep cold starting in the chest, spreading and making breath break. They call it thick air. I'll keep it and send it to you when I can. Don't forget, carry on the story. You wake, touch your bag, open the notebook. Inside is a small hidden piece. A folded letter in her handwriting. Faint scent of herbs. You open it, read again. If you encounter new signs, give them the whisper cloth. Record that thick air. It's not like before. It comes faster, but it is not unhearable. I added a few lines on how I try to distinguish. It's like a silent stretch between breaths and a feeling of being pulled down. When I pull back, I write that I'm still breathing. I sent part through the child. I wait for you. You feel the weight of the letter. Not despair, but a reminder. The new thing she mentions isn't meaningless distortion. It's a cue. The epidemic has layers, forms that if not listened to carefully, will slip by. The network you're part of now not only spreads small life, but learns to distinguish subtle changes in breath. The next morning, as you prepare to move on, Lysa gives you a bit more. A dry mixture in a small pouch, some crushed dried stems, a bit of ground seed, and a note. When you meet someone new, give them this to steep in tea. It doesn't block the disease, but reduces the spreading feeling of that thick air. They'll breathe easier so I can hear, and I can tell how it's different from before. You rewrap the notebook, place the whisper cloth outside, tie the silver cord on, then look back at the small room. The people you've just met have become part of the story holding place here. The small handwriting, pause marks, and tokens are forming another grid, separate but connected to what you carry. As you leave the village, a young person gives you a small fabric roll containing a brief note. If you meet someone who seems silent, place the cloth. If they don't want to speak, leave them. But record, they were here. You nod. When you leave Lysa's village, something like a new tonal layer presses on your shoulders. Not because of physical weight, but because of the clarity. The network is spreading, and where it hasn't reached, the old silence returns in another shape. Rigid, mute, full of bodies lying still. You've heard of disconnected zones. A village is so quiet that the dead are not spoken of, not buried properly, fading into shadows in memory. But you weren't prepared for the blow to the eyes when you reached the valley ahead. A land where life and death lie intermingled, strewn like a torn map. The path narrows downward, and the smell of damp earth mixes with a faint rot as you approach. First there is silence. No calls, no children. Only wind through tall grass, and the flickering cut of light on distant grey-black shapes, figures not moving. Then you see them. They are scattered along the hillside. On the narrow trail, in gnarled bushes, under the shade of collapsed roofs, a man sits leaning against a tree trunk, eyes wide but glazed, dry blackened hand on his thigh. A child lies face down in the dirt, tangled hair, arms stretched as if reaching for someone who is no longer there. A woman sits against a stone wall, head tilted, mouth slightly open as if whispering a word no one hears. Bodies wrapped in rotten cloth, mouths gagged, some only loosely covered with torn rags, a few uncovered, because there is no one left to cover them. You stand still. The wind chills your back, but that cold is small compared to the heaviness in your chest, the density of unacknowledged death, unnamed, unlinked. There are corpses piled in one corner, evidently dragged out of houses, laid down, then abandoned in a half-buried heap. Footprints blotchy from passers-by, but clearly no one came to clean. A gaunt dog loiters in the distance, standing still, looking at you as if it too is listening to the story of this place. You do not have the option of an indifferent passerby. The network you carry, the whisper cloths, the holding stones for breath, the maps, the tokens, all remind you this silence is not the only surrender. Here, the dead are not just lost people. They are untold words, breaths cut midstream, pause marks that never opened into the next line. You move slowly, disturbing the air only as necessary. Your hand touches the notebook, where Mira's notes are. The woman's words, silence saves no one. And something like a whisper from the girl in the hut. Meet, record, don't let them lose shape. You begin with the first thing, listening. As Lysa taught, you do not just look at corpses. You hear, in the body, the remaining pauses in breaths that have ceased. You crouch beside the man leaning against the tree, his forehead still slightly warm, your hand on his chest, then on his neck, seeking the last pause mark. A child nearby, gripping a filthy scrap, looks up at you with hollow eyes. You don't ask. You gently place a small stone beside her head, as they did in the other village, a quiet sign that I was here. You take out the whisper cloth, the one embroidered with the open mouth and tiny drops in old silver thread given by Lysa. You approach the woman against the stone wall, draw back the ragged covering, and place the cloth beside her, not to hide, but to record that final breath, so that someone coming later knows she had a moment of being heard. Another child, about 10, lies next to the body of a man who appears to be her father. You scoop water from a nearby well, dab it on her lips, then place a small paper beside her, a short line. I saw, I recorded, not abandoned. In the middle of that area is a corner that looks like a half-done quarantine zone. A few bodies placed together, covered in cloth, but the covering's appealing, and no one completed the ritual. You dig in your bag, take out a small portion of the fever mixture, the folk remedy from the girl, and smear it on a woman curled up, weakly breathing, lying between two corpses. She doesn't fully awaken, but her breath slows, evens, a stretching you hear in the pause. You place a stone under her pillow and write a few quick words on a scrap. Hold, here, not lost. Then tuck that scrap into a small crevice, like a promise. Whoever comes later will know someone tried to keep her from vanishing completely. You do each part. There is a division not merely to preserve, but so that whoever comes after can read the layers of marks. You take a small piece of wood, the holding point, carved by the old man in the previous village, and place it beside a child who has no life left but still clasps a small stone in her hand, as if someone had instructed. I was here. I was heard. I am not forgotten. As you move, you meet survivors. They draw into the shadows, watching you with caution. An old, thin man sitting near a post, red-eyed, clutching something like a remnant of an old cloth. A young woman tries to cover her brother's body with a torn rag, her gaze carrying more than fatigue, something like resentment, not wanting to be forgotten. They don't speak much. You give them some of the tea Mira provided, brewed with the thick air mix that sharpens breath so you can hear its change. You leave a few lines nearby. I came, I listened. If needed, call. Record. A woman appears from behind, trembling hands dragging a dirty cloth. My son, she says, pointing to the child lying there. They didn't come anymore. I tried to keep him. I didn't know. She looks at you as if asking, is there anything left to do? You cannot answer with grand words. You take a piece of paper, write, I heard. I place the stone. Whoever comes after, keep the name. Don't let silence swallow. You place it in her hand. She nods, places her hand on her son's chest. A gesture without words but weighted. She was heard, albeit late. You cannot bury everybody. There aren't enough people, not enough tools, and most survivors are too exhausted to help. But you do what you can. Carefully stack some corpses at the edge of a mound. cover them with detailed tied cloth, not to completely conceal, but to mark each layer. You draw a small sign in black ink on a stone placed at the head, the unnamed. Then you attach a scrap beside it. They once breathed. A connector came. At one point you sit beside a corpse near a broken fence. It's a young person, seeming once a passerby, clothes still roughly intact but eyes hollow. There's an imprint on his forehead, as if he rested his head on something before silence took over. You place your hand on his chest, feel a small space, no warmth, no opening. But you don't leave. You open the notebook and write, "Stranger past, maybe never met. I heard." I write, "You were here." As dusk nears, a small group appears from the distance. They somberly drag a tall man who clearly once held authority in the village. The remnants of old organisation, a cloth around his neck, bruises on his arms, deep-set eyes, but still a determination. They lay him down, and you realise he is alive. His breathing is chaotic but present. Someone from the group brings out a small wooden board and writes, "We have lost, but he remains. Listen to him." You sit, listen to him speak. Not many words, just pieces. The rasp as he forces breath. You record, "He is a keeper, has lost much. He hears. He is still here." Then they bind him with cloth, place a holding stone nearby, and you know, among the jumble, pieces of life are still waiting to be connected. Night falls. The moon is pale like a strip of silver cloth overhead. You sit among the bodies, burn a little dry straw, not to incinerate, but to make a small ring of warmth, something someone nearby can feel. I haven't left. A few survivors approach, add a handful of wood and sit in silence. They do not speak. The silence here is no longer indifference. It is shared. One of them gives you an old cloth with dried blood. "I keep this," they whisper. "I do not forget. You came. You heard." You wrap it, place it in your bag. A further handprint woven into the web. You write. New pages grow in the notebook. Temporary names, descriptions of how to distinguish the thick air, how the whisper cloth is placed, the small inscribed stone. And the phrases survivors murmur. Don't let them become silence. You add, "If possible, take part of this story back. Let them know someone came, someone saw, someone placed the stone, someone wrote the name." As the night deepens, you pack what you can. You don't have strength to carry it all. You wrap a few remaining small pieces. The stone marked the unnamed. The mother's scrap, a small pouch of leftover herbal powder, and the girl's letter, the words from her dream as a reminder. Write slowly, give them space. I am listening. You place a small whisper cloth beside a lost child, then lay your hand on the living man's forehead. He opens his eyes a little, looks at you, then closes them. You say nothing. You give him a sip of water, place the holding stone near his hand and stand. When you leave Lysa's village, something like a new tonal layer presses on your shoulders. Not because of physical weight, but because of the feeling made clear. The network is spreading, and where it hasn't reached, the old silence returns in another shape. Rigid, mute, full of bodies lying still. You've heard about disconnected zones, about villages that keep silent so much that the dead are not spoken of, not properly buried, turning into blurred shadows in memory. But you weren't prepared for what hits your eyes when you arrive at the valley ahead. A land where life and death lie tangled, strewn like a torn map. The path narrows downhill, and the smell of damp earth mixes with a faint rot as you get closer. First comes silence. No one calls. No children. Only wind through tall grass, and the flickering slice of light on distant grey-black shapes. Figures not moving. Then you see them. They are scattered along the slope, on the narrow trail, in scraggly bushes, under the shade of collapsed roofs. A man sits leaning against a tree trunk, eyes wide but glazed, dry blackened hand on his thigh. A child lies face down in the dirt. Tangled hair, arm outstretched as if reaching for someone no longer there. A woman sits with her back against a stone wall, head tilted, mouth slightly open as if whispering a word no one hears. Bodies wrapped in rotten cloth, mouths gagged, some only barely covered with torn rags. A few uncovered, because there is no one left to cover them. You stand still, the wind chills your back, but that cold is small compared to the heaviness in your chest. The density of death unverified, unnamed, unlinked. There are corpses piled in one corner, clearly dragged out of houses, laid down, then abandoned in a half-buried heap. Street footprints of passers-by, but clearly no one came to clean. A thin dog wanders in the distance, standing still, looking at you as if it too is listening to the story of this place. You don't have the option of an indifferent passerby. The network you carry, the whisper cloths, the holding stones for breath, the maps, the tokens, all remind you that this silence is not the only surrender. Here, the dead are not just lost people. They are untold words, breaths cut midstream, pause marks that never opened into the next line. You move slowly, disturbing the air only as needed. Your hand touches the notebook, where Mira's notes are. The woman's words, "Silence saves no one," and something like a whisper from the girl in the hut. Meet. Record. Don't let them lose shape. You begin with the first thing, listening. As Lisa taught, you don't just look at corpses, you hear in the body. The remaining pauses in breaths that have stopped. You bend beside the man leaning against the tree. His forehead still slightly warm. Your hand on his chest, then on his neck, seeking the last pause mark. A child nearby, clutching a dirty scrap, looks up at you with hollow eyes. You don't ask. You gently place a small stone beside her head, like in the village before, a silent sign that I was here. You take out the whisper cloth, the one embroidered with the open mouth and little drops in old silver thread given by Lysa. You approach the woman against the stone wall, pull back the rag, and place the cloth beside her. Not to cover, but to record that last breath, so someone coming later knows she had a moment of being heard. Another child, about 10, lies beside the body of the man who seems to be her father. You fetch some water from a nearby well, dab it on her lips, then place beside her a small paper. A short line. I saw, I recorded, not abandoned. In the centre of that area is a corner that looks like a half-finished quarantine spot. A few bodies placed together, covered with cloth, but the cloths are peeling, and no one completed the ritual. You dig in your bag, take out a bit of the fever mixture, the folk remedy from the girl, and smear it on a woman curled up, barely breathing, lying between two corpses. She doesn't fully wake, but her breath slows, evens. You hear the stretch in the pause. You place a stone under her pillow and write a few quick words on a scrap. Hold, here, not lost. Then you tuck that scrap into a small crevice, like a promise. Whoever comes later will know someone tried not to let her vanish completely. You do each piece. There is a division not just to preserve, but so whoever comes later can read the layers of marks. You take a small piece of wood, the holding point carved by the old man in the previous village, and place it beside a child who is lifeless, but still clutching a small stone in her hand, as if someone had instructed. I was here. I was heard. I am not forgotten. As you move, you meet survivors. They retreat into shadows, watching you warily. An old, thin man near a post, red-eyed, clutching what looks like remnant of an old cloth. A young woman trying to cover her brother's corpse with a torn rag, her gaze holding more than fatigue. Something like resentment, unwilling to be forgotten. They don't speak much. You give them some of the tea Mira provided, brewed with the thick air mixture to make breathing steadier so you can hear how it changes. You leave a few lines near them. I came, I listened. If needed, call. Record. A woman appears from behind, trembling, dragging a dirty cloth. My son, she says, pointing at the child lying there. They stopped coming. I tried to hold on. I didn't know. She looks at you as if asking, is there anything left to do? You can't answer with big words. You take a scrap of paper. Right. I heard. I place the stone. Whoever comes after, keep the name. Don't let silence swallow. You put it in her hand. She nods, places her hand on her son's chest. A gesture without words, but waited. She was heard, albeit late. You cannot bury all the bodies. There aren't enough people, not enough tools, and most survivors are too exhausted to help. But you do what you can. Carefully stack some corpses at the edge of a mound. Cover them with cloth tied with detail. Not to hide completely, but to mark each layer. You draw a small mark in black ink on a stone placed at the head. The unnamed. Then you add a scrap beside it. They once breathed. A connector came. At one point you sit beside a corpse near a broken fence. It's a young person, maybe a passerby, clothes still roughly intact, eyes hollow. There's an imprint on his forehead, as if he leaned on something before silence took over. You place your hand on his chest. You feel a small space. No warmth, no opening. But you don't leave. You open the notebook and write, stranger past, maybe never met. I heard. I write, you were here. As evening approaches, a small group appears in the distance. They solemnly drag a tall man who clearly once held authority in the village. Remnants of old organisation, a cloth around his neck, bruises on his arms, deep-set eyes, yet still with determination. They lay him down, and you realise he is alive. His breath is chaotic. But there, someone from the group brings out a small wooden board and writes, we have lost, but he remains. Listen to him. You sit, listen to him speak. Not many words, just fragments, the rasp as he draws breath. You record, he is a keeper, has lost much. He hears, he is still here. Then they bind him with cloth, place a holding stone nearby, and you know, among the jumble, pieces of life are still waiting to be linked. Night falls. The moon is pale like a strip of silver cloth above. You sit among the bodies, burn a little dry straw. Not to consume, but to create a small ring of warmth someone nearby can feel. I haven't gone. A few survivors come close, add a handful of wood and sit silently. They do not speak. The silence here is no longer indifference. It is shared. One of them gives you an old cloth with dried blood. I keep this, they whisper. I don't forget, you came. You heard. You wrap it, place it in your bag. Another handprint woven into the web. You write. New pages grow in the notebook. Provisional names, descriptions of how to distinguish the thick air, how the whisper cloth is placed, the small inscribed stone, and the phrases survivors murmur. Don't let them become silence. You add, if possible, carry part of this story back. Let them know someone came, someone saw, someone placed the stone, someone wrote the name. As the night deepens, you pack what you can. You don't have strength to carry everything. You wrap a few remaining small pieces. The stone marked the unnamed, the mother's scrap, a small pouch of leftover herbal powder, and the girl's letter. Her words from the dream as a reminder. Write slowly. Give them space. I am listening. You place a small whisper cloth beside a lost child, then lay your hand on the living man's forehead. He opens his eyes a little, looks at you, then closes them. You say nothing. You give him a sip of water, place the holding stone near his hand and stand. When you leave that keep silent town, what you've learned is no longer just a connector's skill set. It becomes a heavier responsibility. The story is not just carried to be heard and preserved. Now it becomes part of something larger, a team. A team made of people from different places, carrying scattered pieces of knowledge, some misunderstandings, some hard-won experience touching whatever life remained, but all with the same clear purpose: to find ways to make what's spreading stop, or at least to lengthen what they call breath in those facing it. You meet them in a town between two rivers, where the water runs filtered through old earthen embankments, and the murmur of life struggles to surface through the thick silence of those bearing the signs. They are not gathered somewhere ostentatious. They cluster in an old monastery, abandoned by war, the roof leaky, but there is a back room where mats are spread, tables set, books arranged, and clean bottles filled. The first to greet you is a middle-aged man calling himself a doctor from an academy to the north. He carries a worm-eaten book, an old copy of notes on the plague from Arabic and Latin pages, quoting Galen, Avicenna, and a few marginal comments from a secret pupil who fled the quarantined city. He calls the group the Breath Listeners Council, but in fact they are a layering of healers. Former clerics now studying remedies, a weaver who understands fabric hygiene, a woman experienced with root poultices, and several survivors bearing the signs who did not die, what they call living evidence. As you step in, they look at the notebook, take in the embroidered band around your neck, and the silver token on its cover. Each small trace you've brought from elsewhere creates a quiet before they invite you to sit. The one leading is the doctor. His name is Elias. His gaze isn't hard. It carries a deep confusion, like someone trying to save a dying thing with methods both contradictory and hopeful. He asks, "Are you a connector? What did you bring?" You lay the notebook on the table, opened to a page, and begin to tell what you heard, what you saw, the whisper cloth, the holding point, the girl in the hut, Lysa, the silent town, and how they distinguish the thick air. A woman named Maruha, a former cleric now apprenticing in remedies, takes a sheet and copies how you describe the thick air with a simple dot and a small note. Feels like being pressed, then cracking. Another weaver, Jorik, pulls from his pouch a piece of cloth, dips it into a mixture of vinegar and ash, and offers it to you. "We can use this to try to keep the air. I heard from somewhere else that burned ash doesn't just repel, it diffuses the heaviness." What you carry is no longer just a network. It is drawn into a working circle. They do not grandly call this a cure. They call it testing, trying different ways to keep breath from fracturing. They catalogue who is in early stage, mild fever, small buboes, who has the thick air appearing, broken breath, a sensation of air densifying in the chest, who has just crossed the boundary right at the edge between living and fading, and who has belonged to the silence. You're tasked with listening and recording. When Elias and Maruha try the first mixture, fragrant sage, crushed mint leaves, and a hot stone wrapped in cloth pressed to the belly to draw warmth inward, combined with the patient inhaling from a pouch of dried leaves, you hear the breath change. They call it the prelude. The subject is an old woman newly arrived from a neighbouring village, pale-faced, hollow-eyed, but still reactive when you place the whisper cloth beside her. You note, before the treatment her breathing was tight. After inhaling the aromatic mix and having the warm stone placed under her pillow, the pauses between breaths widen slightly. She gives a weak smile. Nothing disappears, but she lives through the evening. The team begins to refine. Yorick suggests, "If I coat the clothing of someone with the sign in a layer of dried vinegar and ash cloth, I can prevent the thick air from clinging, keep it from pooling." Another member, Fadim, a former keeper of unburied dead, proposes reviving an old separation ritual, washing hands thoroughly before touch, burning a circle of herbs around doors, but not as coercion. "I use fire to move Disser," he says, "not to burn, but to keep the air from stagnating. Let it flow." You write. You add a new section to the notebook. The team's initial layers of precaution. You detail how they place small, ash-filled basins under the bed to catch drafts, how they use the whisper cloth to mark someone passed through and under observation, rather than a cold name on a list. It becomes a loop. The next arrival sees the cloth equals someone heard, so they don't face it alone. One morning a child from a nearby village is brought in. He shows the first signs, a few small buboes under the arm, uneven breath, eyes looking into you as if searching for something safe. Elias gives him a cup of water mixed with honey and a bit of sage. Maruha presses a warm cloth with a touch of the mixture to his forehead, and you place a small holding point beside him, a carved stone as a quiet promise. I'm here. I hear. The boy sleeps. When he wakes, his eyes are brighter. His breath is still uneven, but the pauses are slightly longer, and he forces a smile. I can breathe easier, he whispers. That small progress spreads like a streak of light in the dark. The experiments do not deny death, but they make death not come immediately. Those who can hold breath longer are logged, and a list of what makes the breath open, warmth, less oppressive air, quiet instead of shouting, is sent to contacts behind. You use your network to send a piece, a small wrapped, record-bearing mirror's marks, documenting the method, whisper cloth, fever mixture plus holding point, affixed with the hold and listen emblem from the silent town, and a message. Try with newcomers, record breath pauses, don't make noise. But not every trial succeeds. A young member of the team, Thomas, formerly a messenger between villages, grows impatient. He forces a new mixture into a locked-down village, believing giving them the effective thing immediately will change everything. He's given an old woman with heavy signs and chaotic breathing, and he applies the mix too aggressively, placing the hot stone without proper wrapping, overstuffing the inhalation pouch, not allowing time to listen before pushing. The result? Her fever spikes. She coughs blackened droplets, and he collapses afterward. Not because she died, but because he realizes he accelerated the fragile boundary. You pull him aside, place your hand on his shoulder, and hear him whisper, I thought I was helping. I thought faster would win. You don't scold. You open the notebook to the page about when listening is saving. You write in large letters, when people are afraid, they want to act quickly. I must teach them that sometimes slowing is giving days. Teach them to listen before giving the remedy. Teach them to place the stone before speaking. Teach them to let silence not become shouting. Thomas nods, eyes red. Then he returns, carrying those lines, moving slower, passing on the story as you learned. Not forcing, placing the holding point, then waiting. More and more fragments arrive from afar. A person in an eastern village sends a small cloth with hand marks and a note. The whisper cloth helped the old councilwoman know who needed to be heard before she lit the fire. I placed the stone. I recorded. She breathed longer. A blacksmith in the south sends the team a bent piece of iron, a new holding point with a note. I made this as a rough handprint. If someone touches it, they know a connector passed. It's more durable than stone. You incorporate all of it, weaving into the notebook. At night, as the rain softly drums against the monastery roof and the silence weighs, Elias comes to you. We are doing something, he says, placing his hand over the girl's writing. The section about the thick air. I don't know if it will stop the whole wave, but I know this. Some who were once abandoned have been heard. Some now draw longer breaths. And you, the connector, spread that. I want to call what we're doing a healing team. You look out the window, where the distant flickering lights of another village appear like watching eyes. You know the road ahead will be rough. Villages refusing the story, people equating listening with bringing the sickness. Times when what you think is help will push someone toward despair. But you also know, alongside the tangled deaths, before small circles have been drawn, stones placed, cloths laid, light breaths taken, records kept. Those circles are connecting into a net. You place your hand on the notebook and write, we are seekers, not to banish the dark completely, but to give each breath a little more time. So each story can continue. Go where someone needs to be heard. Bring them a stone, a cloth, a line. I was here. I heard. I will not let silence swallow. The road taking you away from the old monastery is a strip of muddy ground, mud clinging to your pant legs with every step. The mist still hangs on the grass, and the damp smell from nearby ponds makes your breath feel a little heavier. But you carry something heavier than the mist, something woven from many voices, many breaths, many circles of having been heard. The team sent you not just as a messenger, but as a bearer of method. Ahead is the northern village, where there are rumours about a strange survivor who once caught Mira's attention. They say her breathing doesn't look like what they've learned. It has pauses, a density, yet she has lived longer than expected. They call her the long breath keeper. You are going to record, to learn, to add into something that might be called hope. The village sits tight in a narrow valley, surrounded by low cliffs, like a bowl turned upside down in the earth. As you approach, you see what has been whispered, not the rigid silence of before, but a silence with depth. People do not shout, but they stand in doorways looking at each other with probing eyes. And you also carry marks, not drawn but visible. The embroidered band around your neck, the notebook with the silver cord, the old holding point stone smeared with mud, and the words of those before, respect where they keep silence, but also bring them something to hear. You are led into a small wooden house on the edge of the village. Inside smells of dried ginger, musk, and a little warming medicine. The woman they call the long breath keeper sits on a low mat. She is not frail in the way of abandonment. Her skin is darkened, her eyes sharp, but the way she places her hand on her chest each time she breathes shows she is adjusting, monitoring each pause herself. There is an empty chair beside her, and a small hanging paper with a few simple drawings, circles, someone who has lived, and a crossed line, no forcing. Connector. She calls you that before you can introduce yourself. Her voice is not hard, just recognition of something like what she's seen before without explanation. You set the notebook down, open to the nearest page, then do not begin with some grand explanation. You offer her the old whisper cloth, place it gently beside her, and say, I came because of you. I heard about how you keep breath. I bring part of the network. I want to listen. I want to know. And if possible, I want to... You stop. She nods slightly, then points to a small jar of pale yellow tea on the wooden table. Before you speak more, she says, drink. I don't accept what has no warmth. You drink. The bitterness flashes, then settles into a honeyed aftertaste. She gives you something to write on, a small board covered with parchment, hurried but clear handwriting. Her notes on how she senses the thick air. It's not something pressing, it's like a thin layer of syrup building inside the chest, but when I exhale it pulls back like cloth being drawn up. I do not force. I listen. I respond. You begin to ask. She answers not with terms but with action. She pulls your hand to place it on her chest, then sets beside it a small carved holding point stone given by the old man from the other region. Like a reminder, I was here. Then she inhales slowly and shows you the stretching in the pause. Then you feel it. A place not tight, not lost, but one to rest in. She reaches behind, takes a small cloth bag, opens it to reveal several dried herb sticks bound with thin silk, emitting a faint warm wood and wet earth scent. I use this, she says, when the thick air appears, not to push it away, just to thin it so I can hear clearer. When I feel it dense, I place a small part beneath the chest, then let the warmth flow. I keep it from thickening. I divide it. You record each detail, then ask, where did you learn? She smiles softly. Not from books. I heard those before me. They died. I kept. When I saw their breath stop, I placed the stone, held the resting place, called them with a look. One night I saw something else. The air not only thick, but like a small bell ringing in the chest. I tried placing the herbs, and the pause widened. I held. You bring her the notes from Elias, from Maruha, from Yorick. The parts about softening the thick air with warmth, how the holding point creates a small mark so others know someone has been listening, and about the whisper cloth. She studies, lays a hand on the pages, nods a few times in acknowledgement, then takes out an old cloth, soaks it with some hot tea. "I will try," she says. The afternoon passes in small experiments. When the thick air appears in a young man in the village, his breath drawn out with difficulty, eyes open but reactive, she combines a lightly crushed herb placed near the chest, a small stone set beside him marking being heard, and a soft whisper near his ear. Not a prayer, but a reminder. Inhale, slow. Listen. He breathes. The pores open slightly. He's not well, but the breath is no longer constricted. The thick softens. You note, when gentle warmth is added and the rest is marked, one is not pulled into weight. Slow response helps. No imposition. You do not just record the method. You begin to integrate what you know with what she holds. Tolan sends a small strip from the network, a note about using the whisper cloth as a silent bridge before someone opens up. You place the cloth on the young man's shoulder. The light touch warning. Someone came. Someone is listening. Then give her an adjusted version of Mira's mixture. A bit of thin warming root, some toasted mint leaves, and let him inhale. This time the thick air doesn't just soften, it splits like a small crack, opening for a gentle flow. The man opens his eyes, looks at you and whispers, "I breathe." The team is no longer individuals. The village begins sending people. They don't bring everything, they bring what can listen. A middle-aged woman, quiet in the early days, arrives with progressing signs. She refuses to shout, only allows you and the long breath keeper to touch. She says, "I used to keep silence. I thought silence was safe, but my breath was still stuck." She opens her hands, accepts the stone, and after a few days the pause lengthens, and the breath is no longer pulled back. She begins bringing small notes to other keepers. "I used to think silence held. Now I know I can slow breath and live." But not everyone believes. One evening, a group from a nearby hamlet arrives, bringing an elder known to distrust telling stories. They believe the spread comes from those who move too much. They look at the cloth tied around your notebook, at the holding point set by the sickbed, and say, "You are doing something to their breath." You toy with what shouldn't be. One in the group tries to snatch the stone, saying it calls something. The long breath keeper stands, not raising her voice, simply draws a small line in the dirt, a listening mark, then places the stone back without reacting to the tug. The leader steps back, watching. You give them a small paper that says, "Place the stone. Let silence not become swallowed silence. Listen before concluding." They don't leave entirely. They observe. A week later, a child from that group returns, bringing a thin piece of cloth with a few trembling words. "I listened. The pause isn't like before. I don't know what to call it, but I see her breathing longer." Thus, the spread is not a glorious triumph. It is a collection of small steps, a slightly longer breath, a stone placed rightly, a doubter becoming one who brings back a recorded scrap. You begin to see something else. What you called healing isn't only in direct remedy. It's in giving people a way to hold their breath long enough that someone else can come, listen, and continue. Night comes and you sit beside her in the small room. She gives you another thin cloth, embroidered with dark thread, showing small interlinked circles like eyes. "I call this the listening point," she says. "When you place it near someone breathing, it keeps the breath from getting lost. The next arrival will see someone has listened. Don't let it be just an object. Give it a name from the places you've touched. Today you brought me the story. Tomorrow I will give back part." You write. You add the listening point to the notebook. Draw it. Embroider it with the names of places that have touched it. The silent village. The network. And the holding point from the old man. You fold the page, leave a small section for the team. Coordination method? Listen first, mark with holding, point, soften with warmth and herbs, and keep the silent link with the listening point to tell those who come after. The night deepens. You lie on the mat, hand clutching the notebook. Extended breaths drift from the other side of the room. Some sleeping, some still awake, listening to themselves. You think about the next road. 2 more villages waiting. One under lockdown because no one dares go. Another where a child, once a living proof, now begins passing part of it on to his sister. You know something has changed. You are no longer alone carrying the story. Now it is a continuing team, a small chain of listen, breathe, record, share circles, spreading like quiet handprints on damp earth. As you begin to believe that the listen, breathe, record, pass on network can spread in ways beyond stones, whisper cloths and words, a new image appears among the people working in the monastery and the villages along the road. A mask, long like a bird's beak, covering half the face, worn by some when they enter the area of caring for the sick. At the front, the beak carries the weight of past whispers mixed with the scent of herbs. Behind round lenses, over the eyes reflect firelight, making whoever stands before it feel watched, not just by a human gaze, but by an alertness that is bound. The one who brings the mask is a woman named Sarah. She is not an official healer. She used to be a scribe and maker of shrouds for the dead, moving between villages as a messenger and keeper of small hints of life. When the plague spread, she saw that what she carried was not enough. The breaths of the sick needed not only to be heard, they needed a distance, a shell, so the caregiver wouldn't be drawn into the thick air and unconsciously carry it away. She brought something she calls the bird mask, a bird head-shaped object. The long, hollowed beak filled with dried herbs and a soft cloth at the back to cradle the head. The beak is not concealment, but a filter, a promise. I will not take your breath. I will keep it outside so I hear it, not let it press down on me. When she arrives, the team falls silent, watching. Elias frowns. Maruha leans in to examine the small embroidered lining in the beak. Yorick strokes the edge of the wooden beak, contemplating the blend of old and new. She pulls you aside, places a hand on your shoulder, that ordinary touch of long-time companions, and says, I came because you carry the mesh. Now I give you a way to still listen without the weight of breath pressing on you. Wear it, feel, write, then give it to others. You don't rush to put it on. The mask is a strong image. It reminds you of the silent bodies, the tilted heads, and those who once looked at you like a shadow. Covering the face is not just to ward off disease. It makes others reflexively keep quieter, release something small, a breath not overwhelmed by fear. You let Sarah lift the straps, place the mask on. When your breath fills the small space between beak and lips, you hear something like filtered sound, not gone, but passing through another layer, both intimately personal and clear. Sarah explains, the beak holds herbs, dried mint, dried orange peel, thyme root, some resin and ash. When you inhale, the weight, the thick air, has to pass through that first. It doesn't push disease away. It softens what is piling up in the chest, so it doesn't form a solid layer. When you exhale, you push it outward without letting it stick to you. The touch between you and the sick has distance. The breath is heard, but not blurred into yours. You go with her to a corner where a middle-aged man is dealing with her, the thick air rolling in his breath. He's lain still for days, eyes looking at you as if asking something you can't hear. You wrap the whisper cloth as usual, place the small holding point beside him, and put on the mask. As you approach, Sarah whispers, don't be sudden, breathe slow, let him know you are a connector, not an imposer. You begin to listen. The thick air tries to pile up like a layer, wanting to smother each breath. You place a light hand on his shoulder, then bring the herbal-laden beak near your own nose. Inhale, and guide his breath. His breaths are no longer angrily weighted, but have a soft pause. He looks up at you, eyes slightly widened. Something just seen. You don't make me a burden. You just listen. Sierra records. You record. When he exhales, you write. Longer pause. The weight doesn't push up the throat. He reacts with a small furrow. No pain, just awareness. In the days that follow, the bird mask spreads. Not just one. Sarah and Yorick refine it, using thicker leather inside for warmth, adding a thin internal cloth as a small listening point. When breath touches it, a tiny woven thread in the beak trembles slightly, like a hand-recorded note. So the next connector knows the thick air has been engaged and responded to. New arrivals view the masks warily at first. Some from the previously silent village regard them as something that complicates silence. But then they see, when the masked person comes, they do not reflexively avoid. They inhale, exhale, and sometimes they open their mouths to relay a small thing, a detail about breath, a quiet thank you nod. You don't just wear the mask to protect yourself, you also use it as a bridge. When you meet someone frightened, you don't take it off immediately. You let them see the long beak with its little shimmering embroidery, then pull the eye cover aside, tilt your head gently, and offer them the whisper cloth first, as if to say, I hear. I'm not here to take. You realise the mask makes listening before speaking easier. It creates a noticeable space between the breath keeper and the one approaching. Not a cold silence, but an intentionally placed quiet. One rainy afternoon, the team receives a young person with new signs. Someone who screams with fear, has small buboes and carries that weight spreading into his chest. They bring him inside, and you give him a smaller version of the bird mask, Sierra adjusted for his size. He looks at it, then at you. You place the holding point beside him, then show him how to breathe, slowly, through the beak so the weight doesn't pile up again. At first he panics, but after a few breaths something shifts. The yelling quiets, replaced by a breath you can hear. He manages a small phrase. I feel my breath lengthen. The bird mask doesn't just aid caregivers. Once, a survivor bearing the sign who hadn't died, the so-called living proof of a neighbouring village, comes in with exhausted breathing. He had tried to maintain silence. He believed silence blocked the disease, then got trapped in prolonged thick air. When you offer him the mask, he forces a smile. I thought I was being deceived, he says. When he puts it on and inhales deeply, the heaviness eases. He exhales. I hear myself breathe, he says, and for the first time in many days, he adds, I can help others. Sarah doesn't stop at distributing masks. She and Marwa experiment combining inside the beak the long breath keeper's herbs, a bit of bark, some light thyme leaves, plus a new herb Mira calls the soft breath ring. When ground mixed with honey dried, it emits a gentle warmth that prevents the pores from snapping shut. I call it soft breathing, Mira whispers, as she hands you a small pinch to add into the beak. When someone with thick air inhales, the weight melts, and the internal listening point in the beak gently vibrates like, I receive, I am responding. From then on, the bird mask becomes the team's new symbol. Not of authority, but of active listening. Each is marked with a small strip of cloth bearing the name of where it was born, the network, silent village, long breath keeper, listening point. You add a special page to the notebook, how to use the bird mask. It includes sections. Preparation. Lightly burn the herb mix first so the scent lingers. Tighten the strap so it fits snugly but doesn't constrict. Listen first. Place the holding point near the sick. Watch the first pause. Inhale slowly through the beak, letting the thick air pass through the herb layer. Listen for the slight tremor of the woven internal listening point. Respond. Place the stone, gently touch the sick. Whisper, I am listening. Breathe slowly. Record. After each session, write down impressions of the pause's stretch, changes in breath, and any new scent in the beak, so the next user can understand what occurred. One evening, rumours of the bird mask reach a small village where an old woman guards a corner. She doesn't trust new things. She thinks covering the face hides the spirit of what's happening. When you arrive, She looks at the mask on you, at the small holding point and the stone beside her sick daughter. You say little. You set the mask on the table, place the whisper cloth by her chair, then slowly lower the hood so she can see inside. I'm not here to take her breath away, you say. I'm here to keep it from being dragged down. The old woman carefully takes the beak, places it on her face and inhales. The suspicion in her eyes gradually shifts into recognition. The daughter's breath, once tight and broken into hard segments, opens now. It is light, soft, longer. She places her hand on her daughter's chest, looks at you, then gives something almost like a nod. She takes an old scrap of cloth and embroiders a small symbol. Open eyes with, beneath, a small bird beak, a mark not of control, but of reception. She writes beside it, I know. I keep, I give. Then she gives you something new, a small vial of a mixture she calls Old Wind, made from bark, resin, and a bit of dried grass powder to put into the beak, helping ease the thick sensation at night. You tuck it away. The mask is no longer a strange tool. It is part of what you carry forward, something that draws people in, opens the silence that once suffocated, then continues. I was here. I listened. I placed the beak to keep distance and still feel. I gave breath one more day. The distance between breath and death is no longer a wall of silence. It is a fragile line held by many hands, by the holding stones, the whisper cloths, and now by the bird masks. What began as scattered experiments is becoming a supple procedure, something you and the team quietly call when no one else is around. How we hold breath. The morning after the night you stayed with the long breath keeper, you focus on passing it on, not just carrying the bird mask, but putting it into others' hands so they understand. Thomas, who once rushed and made an old woman's fever worse with hasty action, is now the first you teach. You place the mask on his face, adjust the leather straps, then show him the tiny listening point woven inside the beak. Listen before you touch, you whisper. Inhale slowly, let the weight pass through, then place the stone, then write. He breathes in, feels the faint vibration in the woven part and goes quiet. His eyes widen as if he's just recognised something bitter but true, then follows you out to try on a young man with spreading thick air. This time there is no hurry. He sets the whisper cloth, letting the man know someone is watching, then dons the mask, inhales, using his own breath as a bridge. The man exhales, longer pause. Thomas turns, nods slightly. I understand, he says. The team begins to standardise. Maruha records what they call the healing rhythm, quiet approach. The marked person is met without added fear by placing a whisper cloth first, so they know I've come. Mark presence. Set the holding point stone beside them, silently, so those who come after know someone is being watched. Listen to breath. Assess the thick air with touch and gaze. Observe the pause. Use a listening point or special cloth to locate where to intervene. Adjust with bird mask and herbs. Have the caregiver wear the mask, inhale slowly, then apply the soft herb mix to ease the density, not forcing, letting the patient respond without being pushed. Hold and record. After intervention, write the changes. How much longer the pause, new scents, the slight tremor at the listening point, and the patient's felt experience. You add variance to the notebook. Some people dislike the mask because it reminds them of dead faces covered. You learn to present the mask, show them inside. Give the whisper cloth first, then gently place it near, without pressure. Some don't trust the holding stone, so you teach them to make a small clay handprint with "I was here" carved, a softer substitute that still tells the next arrival, someone listened. Then what you feared most happens, the kind of spread caused by missing a small step. A nearby village sends a group, including a woman with obvious signs, tight throat, short breath. Thomas, too eager to show the new way, skips the first step. Instead of placing the whisper cloth to create a quiet connection, rushes the intervention. The woman panics, eyes wide with fear, and her thick air reacts violently, compressed, recoiling. Her fever spikes. Something in her breath turns into pain. The whole village tenses. Rumour spreads like fire. The connector brought strange things. You run. She is curled in, her breath fragmented, and the density clings like a heavy cloth refusing to let go. Thomas is pale. You place the holding stone. Bring up the whisper cloth. Whisper to her. Stay still. Breathe. Slowly. You adjust the bird mask's beak to fit. Inhale through the softened mix, then gently place a small bit beneath her sternum. Not pressure. Just letting warmth drift. She responds. Her breath stalls, then as if a crack in a dam. The pause widens. Not a complete saving, but enough to keep her from crossing the line. You note, too early, violent reaction, needed the initial quiet. That mistake becomes a widening crack, breeding doubt. Some say, tell this and you spread chaos. You don't deny it. You pull Thomas aside to show him the lines on the page. When I forgot to begin with quiet, I pushed her harder into the weight. I was retaught. First let them know you've come. Place the stone. Listen. Don't act out of something bigger than fear. Thomas bows his head, then returns, sits quietly beside the woman. The next day, her breathing is steadier. The silence that had been gnawed anger becomes a quiet pause, and a child in the village watches you whispering, I see she's still breathing. That small loss turns into a lesson. The team no longer calls it Thomas's personal failure. They call it the reminder gap. What happens when the initial chain of quiet is skipped? You add to the notebook. If someone reacts violently after intervention, step back, breathe, give them a stone, wait, then proceed. Trust is rebuilt slowly. The still febrile woman sends back to the team a small embroidered cloth, a tiny bird mask with open eyes beneath, writing beside it. I thought silence held me, but I breathed longer because someone came quietly. She cuts off a bit of the old wind she kept and gives it to you. Add to the beak. When you go, give them some. They need to hear before they smell. Amid the chaos are gentle moments. One night when rain taps the monastery's tin roof, a lightly marked child comes knocking. Its eyes are afraid, voice not whole. You give it a small bird mask, adjust it to its young face, place a holding point under the pillow, and whisper, sit, breathe, I hear. It inhales, then gives a small smile. Its breath, the pause no longer rushed, the thick easing. That night it sleeps as it hasn't before. Gradually the idea spreads. Long-time keepers in other villages carry portable bird masks, rough copies made from oak and cloth, with hand-stitched listening points, labelled with the places they learned. Silent village, the network. Listening point, long breath keeper. They pass on the healing rhythm to newcomers, not through grand lectures, but by handing them a cloth. This is the first cloth. Place it before speaking. This is the stone. Don't forget it. And if their breath becomes heavy, bring out the mask. Breathe. Listen. Not every place accepts it. In one village when you and Thomas arrive, they shut their doors, hang faded white X's, and a middle-aged woman comes out asking, what do you bring? I heard connectors already cost the village 3 lives with hasty actions. You look into her eyes, set the bird mask down, place a holding stone on the table, and say, I bring quiet. I bring a way to listen. I'm not here to pry open anything. I'm here to ask, what have you heard? She looks, then leads you inside. Her sister, whose breath sounds frozen in her chest, lies in the corner. She believes silence is protection. You don't rush. You place the stone, set the whisper cloth, letting the girl know someone has come. Then, with permission, you put on the mask, inhale, and let the thick air be guided out. Not expelled, but thinned. The girl opens her eyes, then breathes a long sigh. The middle-aged woman sits beside her, and for the first time smiles. I hear, she says. I understand. I will teach others. You write, A village that refused to protect silence. When heard properly, the silence remains, but is opened just enough so breath continues. What's needed is to show them. I do not take. I hold. I connect. That afternoon, a young woman arrives, one who fled elsewhere with a broken bird mask. Its beak cracked and says, "We have none left, I've come to learn." You give her a new one? Teach her how to tie it, how to listen. And when she inhales for the first time through the beak, filled with the long breath keeper's soft breath powder, she exhales and murmurs a small word. I hear. When night falls, you sit around the fire in the monastery. Thomas lies on his side, dark circles under his eyes, notebook in hand. The bubo on his arm still there, but no longer hot. He places his hand on the paper and writes a new entry. I used to rush, now I go slower. I learnt to say I've come. I don't promise grand things. I place the stone. I wait for the breath to answer. You nod, take the pen, add beneath. I am a connector. I carry the mask. I carry the words of those who have heard. I will go on to the village, where they fear to speak. As you enter the next village, the screams are no longer isolated. They spill out thick as the night mist, hitting your ears in waves. A sound not entirely physical pain. It twists inward, dragging fear, despair, and a strange ache as if each breath is fighting for the right to exist. People shout out between coughs, their voices cracking into fragments. Others moan on and on, a sound like dragging wet cloth across the ground. A child cries someone's name who never comes back, then falls silent. The silence heavier than any scream before. That noise blankets every corner, echoes off stone walls, pours down narrow alleys, mingles with the wind rolling over roofs, becoming a background that soaks into bone. You hear it first from afar, then quicken your pace. Thomas walks beside you, clutching the notebook like something sacred. It's not the same sound as before, he whispers. It wraps around me. You nod, feeling the tremor in your own chest, the screaming like a curtain drawn back to reveal people lying prostrate in thatch huts, storage corners, half-closed rooms, each breath stretched like a plucked string. I hear, the keeper in this village says, as he leads you into a low house. Inside, a middle-aged woman lies on a mat, eyes rolled wide, mouth open as if pushing something out. But what comes is not normal breathing. It's a strangled scream tangled with choked noises and ragged gasps, as if something is seizing her breath and twisting. Her son sits nearby, hands pressed to his head, eyes brimming, trying not to cry aloud for fear of adding to the roar. The woman keeps screaming, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. Each time, Thomas sets the holding point stone gently beside her, fingers fidgeting with the whisper cloth, whispering, I hear, breathe, I'm here. You look around, bird masks hang on hooks behind, waiting their turn. They've learned no one barges in screaming during that storm. There must be a quiet circle first, a small calm placed on the patient's shoulder, a light touch, a dry whisper. I've come, I hear. Then intervention. You step forward, this time wearing the bird mask, its beak packed with the soft breath from earlier regions, and lay your unweighted hand against her chest. You listen to the surge, the density, the tugging, like a thick woven layer. When she gasps, you whisper, slow, I'm not taking. Breathe. The scream retreats a bit, not gone, but drawn taut enough that whoever is inside can grab hold. You coordinate with Maruha. She mixes a warm blend and places it on the woman's brow. Thomas keeps the quiet hold with a gentle arm around her, and you place the whisper cloth by her mouth, not to cover, but to mark that someone has come and heard. She draws a breath, and for the first time in hours, a small pause opens in the middle of her scream, like a slit of light seeping in. She no longer immediately wails. Her voice mingles with breath, half pleading, half release. The screaming isn't only from the sick body, it erupts from those around. An old woman who lost her husband the week before lets out a wail, laced with regret. I should have brought water sooner. A child watching his sister cough whispers and bites his lip until it bleeds, trying to hold back noise so the chaos doesn't spread. A young man carrying his trembling father half whispers, "Keep quiet, don't shout." Mixed into that chaos, something else weaves through. Screams muffled, like a current pulled back when a stone catches in the flow. That is the effect of shared breath. Not a sudden end, but pieces drawn out of the rupture, creating a pause long enough to continue. You write, "The screaming is the resistance of the thick air being drawn apart. When we place the mask, when we give the first quiet, the pause opens. It's not something taken away, it's something separated so they can breathe on." At the end of the alley, a group of young people bring in a young woman screaming, tears mixing with sweat, surrounded by those waiting. An older brother covering his mouth to muffle supplicating sounds, an elderly mother pursing her lips so hard they crack. The young woman initially won't let anyone touch her. Every approach makes her scream flare, like a storm fighting back. You don't rush in. You take a small cloth, soak it quickly in warm water, press it to her hand, then step back, letting her know, "I'm here. I'm not taking." She whispers something fragile, "Don't," and goes quiet. That gap is enough for you to bring the bird mask forward. She inhales. At first she jolts, then breathes again. The thick air doesn't crush, it softens. She stops screaming. She cries. The other cries in the quarter shift tone. Not shrill, but lower, like a held sigh. You move through, collecting every sound. An old man with bent shoulders has only part of his throat still moving. No longer loud screams, just broken long groans. And his eyes are open, looking at you as if to say thank you, though he has no breath left to speak. You place a holding point beside him, set a small listening mark near his bed, then quietly write, "He used to scream." Now he touches the pause. Breath has weight. The screaming wears the team down in ways that can't be measured. You see it in Thomas's trembling hands, in the furrowed brow of Elias, as he struggles to decide who will get the next soft breath trial, in Maruha's eyes as she passes each small change, in the silence of survivors watching, not avoiding, but assessing. I need that for my own. There are moments you feel your own thinness, ears ringing, heart racing when a scream twists from behind like a knife cutting the air. You learn to keep your own pause. Inhale, take in breath. Let the scream not soak into you like a problem to fix immediately, but like a beat in the continuing chain. Listen, respond. Withdraw to give space. One night when rain patters on the tile roofs and the screaming softens into choked, fading sounds, a boy of about 10 is brought in. His eyes are wide, but his mouth makes no sound. He holds the scream in his chest, vibrating like a taut string, near breaking. He has no obvious buboes, but the thick air weighs on his ribs, making every breath heavy. You give him a small bird mask, adjust it by hand and set a holding point under his pillow. Breathe. Light. I hear. He inhales and for the first time, a sound leaves him, not a scream, but a deep stretched out release from deep inside. He closes his eyes and you know, the scream is no longer forced in. When you step outside near dawn, a mother stands in the yard, red-eyed, holding the hand of the child who had once screamed and now sleeps, breathing evenly, with pauses. She takes your hand, says nothing, only offers a small embroidered cloth, a little bird mask and a holding stone. Beneath it the words, "I heard. I do not forget." The distance between breath and death is no longer a wall of silence. It is a thin line held in place by many hands, by the holding stones, the whisper cloths, and now by the bird masks. What began as scattered experiments is becoming a flexible procedure, something you and the team quietly call, when no one is around, how we hold breath. The morning after the night you spent with the long breath keeper, you focus on passing it on, not just carrying the bird mask, but putting it into other people's hands so they understand. Thomas, who once acted too fast and worsened an old woman's fever with hasty interference, is now the first you teach. You place the mask on his face, adjust the leather straps, then show him the small listening point woven inside the beak. Listen before you touch, you whisper. Breathe slowly. Let the weight go through. Then place the stone. Then write. He inhales, feels the faint vibration in the woven part, and goes quiet. His eyes widen as if he's just recognised something bitter but true, then follows you out to try with a young man whose thick air is spreading. This time there is no rush. He sets the whisper cloth, letting the man know someone has come, then dons the mask, inhales, using his own breath as a bridge. The man exhales. Longer pause. Thomas turns and nods slightly. I understand, he says. The team begins to codify. Maruha writes down what they call the healing rhythm. Quiet approach. The marked person is met without adding fear by placing a whisper cloth first, so they know I've come. Mark presence. Set the holding point stone beside them, silently, so those who come after know someone is being watched. Listen to breath. Assess the thick air by touch and sight. Observe the pause, use a listening point or special cloth to locate where to intervene. Adjust with bird mask and herbs. Have the caregiver wear the mask. Inhale slowly, then apply the soft herb mixture to ease the density, not forcing, letting the patient respond without being pushed. Hold and record. After intervention, write the changes. How much longer the pause is, new sense, the slight tremor at the listening point, and the patient's felt experience. You add variations to the notebook. Some people reject the mask because it reminds them of the shrouded dead faces. You learn to present it gently. Show them inside. Give the whisper cloth first, then place it nearby without pressure. Some distrust the holding stone, so you teach them to make a small clay handprint with "I was here" carved into it. A softer substitute that still signals to the next arrival. Someone listened. Then the thing you feared most happens. The spread caused by skipping a small step. A village not far away sends a group, including a woman with clear signs, tight throat, laboured breath. Thomas, too eager to show the new way, forgets the first step. Instead of placing the whisper cloth to establish quiet connection, he leaps into intervention. The woman panics, eyes wide with fear, and her thick air reacts violently, compressed, recoiling. Her fever rises. Something in her breath turns into pain. The village tenses. Rumour flares. The connector brought something strange. You run in. She is curled up, breath broken into short fragments, and the density clings like a heavy cloth refusing to loosen. Thomas is pale. You place the holding stone, bring the whisper cloth, whisper to her, stay still, breathe slowly. You adjust the bird mask's beak, inhale through the softened mixture, then gently place a small bit beneath her sternum. Not pressure, just warmth. She responds, her breath stutters, and then like a crack opening, the pause widens. Not a full rescue, but enough to keep her from crossing over. You note, too early, violent reaction, needed the initial quiet. That mistake becomes a spreading crack sowing doubt. People say, tell that and you spread chaos. You don't deny it. You pull Thomas aside and show him the lines on the page. When I forgot to begin with quiet, I pushed her deeper into the weight. I was taught again. First, let them know you've come. Place the stone. Listen. Don't act from something bigger than fear. Thomas bows his head, then returns, sits quietly beside the woman. The next day her breathing is steadier. The silence that had been gnawed anger becomes a quiet pause, and a child in the village watches you and whispers, I see she's still breathing. That small loss turns into a lesson. The team stops calling it Thomas's personal failure. They call it the reminder gap. What happens when the initial chain of quiet is skipped? You add to the notebook. If someone reacts violently after intervention, step back, breathe, give them a stone, wait, then proceed. Trust is rebuilt slowly. The still feverish woman sends back an embroidered cloth, a tiny bird mask with open eyes beneath, with writing. I thought silence held me, but I breathed longer because someone came quietly. She cuts off a bit of the old wind she's been keeping and gives it to you. Add to the beak. When you go, give them some. They need to hear before they smell. Amid the chaos, there are gentle moments. One night, while rain rattles the monastery tin roof, a lightly marked child comes knocking, eyes frightened, voice broken. You give it a small bird mask, adjust it to its young face, place a holding point under the pillow, and whisper, "Sit, breathe, I hear." It inhales, then offers a small smile. Its breath, the pause no longer hurried, the thick easing. That night it sleeps as it hadn't before. Gradually the idea spreads. Long-time breath-keepers in other villages carry portable bird masks, rough copies built from oak and cloth with hand-stitched listening points, labelled with the places they learned. Silent Village, the beat, network, listening point, long breath keeper. They pass on the healing rhythm to newcomers, not through grand lectures, but by handing them a cloth. This is the first cloth. Place it before speaking. This is the stone. Don't forget it. And if their breath becomes heavy, bring out the mask. Breathe. Listen. Not every place accepts it. In one village, when you and Thomas arrive, they shut their doors, hang faded white X's, and a middle-aged woman asks, "What do you bring?" I've heard connect has already cost us 3 lives with hasty actions. You look into her eyes, set the bird mask down, place a holding stone on the table, and say, "I bring quiet. I bring a way to listen. I'm not here to pry open anything. I'm here to ask, what have you heard?" She considers, then leads you inside. Her sister, whose breath sounds frozen in her chest, lies in the corner. She believed silence was protection. You don't act hastily. You place the stone, set the whisper cloth, letting the girl know someone has come. Then, with permission, you put on the mask, inhale, and let the thick air be guided out. Not expelled, but thinned. The girl opens her eyes, then breathes a long sigh. The middle-aged woman sits beside her, and for the first time smiles. "I hear," she says. "I understand. I will teach others." You write, "A village that refused in order to protect silence. When heard properly, the silence remains, but opens slightly so breath can continue. What's needed is to show them, I'm not taking. I hold. I connect." That afternoon, a young woman comes, one who fled from elsewhere with a broken bird mask, its beak cracked, and says, "We have none left, I've come to learn." You give her a new one? Teach her how to tie it, how to listen. And when she inhales for the first time through the beak, filled with the long breath keeper's soft breath powder, she exhales and murmurs a small word. "I hear." When night falls, you sit around the fire in the monastery. Thomas lies on his side, circles under his eyes, notebook in hand. The bubo on his arm still there, but no longer hot. He places his hand on the page and writes a new entry. "I used to rush. Now I go slower. I learnt to say I've come. I don't promise grand things. I place the stone. I wait for the breath to answer. You nod, take the pen and add beneath. I am a connector. I carry the mask. I carry the words of those who have heard. I will go on to the village where they fear to speak." When what's spreading inside you is no longer an isolated sign, but becomes a whisper drawn out in every breath, starting from within like a cold blade tightening your chest, you know you can't escape it. Not because you're weak, but because what you call the contagion spares no one who's touched it long enough. It doesn't distinguish storyteller, listener, or lantern bearer. It slips into you through the pauses you once used to listen, through the light touches to place stones, through the cold sweat you wipe away after a long night. The first day after you recognise it, you feel it like a tiny bead of rain lodged in your chest. Not painful, just awareness of something foreign lying there. Then spreading. A chill that had only flickered becomes a roll from your shoulders down your spine, erupting into fever. You try to keep rhythm, You still wear the bird mask, still listen to your own thick air. Your breathing is uneven, pauses pulled tight, like a cord being strangled, then released imperfectly. The bubo under your arm swells, harder, and sometimes a faint electric shock races along your veins when you inhale. You write every line. I am being invaded. It isn't like the others. It's different in that I can still hear, but that hearing is pulled, diminished. You place a holding point stone beside where you lie, wrap your own whisper cloth around your neck, not to hide, but so whoever comes after will know. I was here. I am. You prepare the deliberately isolated corner you built. A small bowl of ginger water, some soft breath herbs, and the open notebook. On the second day, the fever tightens its grip. The morning chill turns into a fire under the skin. You feel every vein burning. Then a shiver washes through. Your back trembles not from fear, but because the rising temperature makes your muscles spasm. The buboes spread. Along your neck and groin appear more. Swollen nodules like bruised dark grapes, taut and aching when touched. Sleep won't hold. Each doze floats you between dream and waking into a murky place where the faces of the dead bleed into the breaths you once helped lengthen. The pain intensifies. It isn't ordinary pain, not localized, but like your whole body is being squeezed and torn in segments. Every inhale feels like a pull from your belly into your chest, scrambling your heart. Every exhale feels the thick air inside not only dense, but layering, cracking, choking you. Coughs come, not soft dry ones, but shattering bursts, like something deep inside trying to break free. Each cough slices through your ribs, folding you inward. Sometimes you hear gurgling in your chest, not quite breath, not quite something crumbling. And you tell yourself, breathe, light, I hear. You begin to delirize. The boundaries between light and dark blur. Sometimes you see the team's small rituals, stones placed, faces wiped, whispers, and sometimes you believe they are right, beside you just touching your shoulder. Breathe, listen. The bird mask feels heavier. Breathing through it grows ragged. The herbs in the beak smell strange, as if echoing what's mingling in your own air. You use it not only to keep distance from others, but to preserve a separation between what's invading you and the rest of the world. As if your breath, unfiltered, might drag them down with it. On the third day, you barely have strength to stand. Your hand shakes as you hold the pen. Each letter is an effort. Your skin cracks dry at the fingertips, lips split and bleeding with every breath. The buboes now reach under your collarbone. Red, filled, hot. You dare not touch, but you do to check. It feels like something pounding. You turn yourself, place a holding point stone on your shoulder to record that you still know, then flip the page and write, "The pain isn't just flesh. It's in every cut pause. In every word I can't finish. I still hear, but my ears hear something like being forgotten. I remember those I helped. I think of the girl in the hut, the long breath keeper, Lysa, the ones from the network, the villages that opened. I want to pull the story out of me. I write so it doesn't sink with my last breath. You catch moments of clarity sharp as a blade. You recall how Thomas learned, how Mira instructed listen before giving, Elias's voice about the recorder for the connector. That becomes part of your resolve. Let the remainder of the story be passed on, even if this body dissolves into final silence. You prepare a small packet, a neatly rolled paper, wrapped tight, placed in a light box. On it you write brief instructions. If you find me, do not bury the silence hastily. Open. Take the stone beside me. It has recorded. Carry my story to where I've been. Tell. A connector came. The connector was not alone. Add to the shared breath what was seen. The final pause. What was prolonged and what wasn't. You affix a small fragment carrying the scent of the soft breath herbs in the corner, so whoever follows knows the fragrance that held. You ask Thomas to take it. if you no longer can. He sits beside you, eyes red, shoulders shaking. He doesn't speak. He writes back, "I will go, I will carry. I will not let this part be lost." The fourth day is the turning point. The fever becomes a burning blaze through every vein, but now it's not just heat, it's abandonment. Your body no longer responds to previous measures the same way. Your nose bleeds slightly, throat cracks, and the breath you hear from inside feels like old wind torn, coming out in shards that don't return. Your fingers go numb, then lose feeling, then burn. At one point you try to reach Thomas to steady him, but your hand is too weak. You look at him as if he's a stranger, then remember, Thomas, connector, recorder. The physical pain isn't just flesh, it's the distortion of the very pauses you taught others to hold. Now your own pauses are irregular, deep inhalations cut short by something pressing on the lungs, each breath like pulling a taut thread, requiring all your remaining force not to drop it. Every part reels, liver pressed, intestines knotting, your head spinning as if a storm rages in your skull. Each groan isn't complaint. It's a bounded protest from what remains. You no longer have the energy to fully control the delirium. In flashes you see faces who stood beside you, the long breath keeper, the young woman, a child breathing calmly in the listening village, and a vague thought surfaces. I gave. I still give. Then pain surges like a tongue of fire. You brace, bite your lip until it bleeds and write. Pain is the residue of what could not be held longer. It offers no apology, no mercy. It is only a sign. You are near. But I do not fear. I am not merely a shell. I am the stories that have been linked. On the fifth day, your body is almost squeezed thin. You cannot fixate on day or hour. Your vision blurs, but when you open your eyes, you still see Thomas sitting there, still steady, hands on the notebook, as if keeping it from dropping you. Listen, you whisper, not to teach, but to remind. I hear. I once did. He takes your hand gently. The touch is a commitment. I will carry. The chill returns. Not the first cold, but something deep in the bone. Waves of cold run through you, making you feel fractured. Strange, purplish mottling appears on your skin, veins standing like fine nets beneath, then discoloration spreading. Not fully black, but looking as if light itself is being drained. Your nose catches every rasp of breath, old wind torn, then softened. Like the last bits of air being held not by strength, but will. You sense a kind of loosening, not an instantaneous departure, but thin layers separating. Your vision stretches, then fades, the light in your eyes pulling inward like a weak lamp in its glass. At this point you write less. With trembling hand you open a fresh page, set the pen, and leave a short final passage. Shaky but clear. I leave this last word. Let the story continue. Do not let silence swallow me. The stone lies beside me. The bird mask for the one who comes. I heard. I went. I was not alone. You give the notebook back to Thomas, place the cleaned beak of the bird mask on the corner, draw one more breath, and feel the pause lengthen. Different than before, not because you are stronger, but because something has let go. There is no great fear. There is a release. As if you are handing your last piece to the network. To the inked words, to the stones, to the cloths. So it continues. Thomas presses his hand to your forehead, feels the heat, then bows his head. He says nothing. You hear around? No loud wailing, no extravagant grieving. A few survivors holding scraps from elsewhere stand quietly outside the doorway. They know. They, don't need words. The pain softens, not because it lessens, but because you no longer have strength to resist. The final breath carries no scream. It is a very long pause, like the last pin pulled from a rolled-up map. You feel warmth drain from your body, layer by layer falling away. And in the deep stillness you hear a small thing, your own whisper, not in words but in feeling. I went. I left. Then, like a slowly fraying tether, you release. Your eyes close. Your chest no longer rises. The holding point stone rests beside you. The whisper cloth around your neck is damp, the trace of that last breath. The notebook lies open between pages. What you just wrote remains dark and clear. Thomas sits a long time. He draws a light cloth over you, not to hide but to warm what has just departed. He takes the packet you prepared, wraps it with the soft breath fragment, then cuts a thin drip from your own cloth and ties it around the notebook as an additional handprint. The connector was here. He calls several members of the team. They come. They do not disturb what you left. They do as instructed. Take the stone, place it beside your body, carefully set out the bird mask, ink a note. The connector was invaded. The connector listened to the end. Continue. Breath is the pulse, story is the thread. They do not forget you. They go on, carrying your part. The notebook with extra pages, the bird mask adjusted by your notes, the holding stones marked with added handprints, and the brief paper you left as a testament.